We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. We're going to be hanging out today. I have a couple special guests that will be showing up here at first, and then maybe once we talk a bit, I'll open the doors up, allowing some of you guys to join in and hang out. It's Sunday, right? So let's have fun. With that being said, I have Jacob Ehrman. What is going on, my friend?
I'm good. How about you?
Dude, hanging out. Was just trying to put something in my stomach. I've been nonstop. So hold on. Someone said my mic sounds weird. Let me make sure.
Your mic sounds fine to me now. It sounded low, and like pieces of it sounds slightly cut out a little bit, but it looks fine now. It fixed itself.
If you think it sounds okay, then I'm cool with it. I just want to make sure everything looks good.
Yeah, I know. I knew what he was talking about though at first. When it was just right after the intro, it was a little bit off there.
Right. Well, I just want everybody to know James Stevens Valiant is going to join us today as well. He has the book Creating Christ, How Roman Emperors Invented Christianity. And of course, this is the Roman provenance position. And James will be joining us here shortly. He also creatingchrist.com. Go check him out over here. He debates all of the time. He's a philosopher. He debates. He talks about all sorts of topics. And looking forward to having James join us here in a moment. Also, Jacob Ehrman, man, you've been doing big things over here on your YouTube channel. Yeah. You had Bart Ehrman, and that's going to be streaming here at 7 p.m. Eastern?
Yeah, 7 p.m. your time, yeah.
Wow, okay. That'll be a fun one. Everybody go subscribe to Jacob. Jacob's been on the channel before. He's continued to improve in his understanding and just learning a lot of stuff. You're a reader, man. You spend a lot of time reading. So here, I just posted the link in the comment section for everybody to go subscribe to the YouTube channel and be ready. I'm going to share this on my community tab, but be ready for the actual streaming with Bart Ehrman.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, from a 1 to 10, how well do you think your editing was for this video?
I'm actually pretty confident, and I would say 10. Obviously, I'm probably being biased towards my own editing. Yeah, but it's really up to the audience. What do you guys think? But I think I did pretty well on this one.
Well, let's see what everyone has to say. Hopefully, they'll leave a little comment down in the chat, letting you know how well it did. Well, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces in our chat today too. Giving a shout out, Kirk, Troggy, Rochester, Johnny, Mr. Willis, Barry. My friend Derek, who's really not my friend. I pretend to be his friend. He pays me to be his friend. Isn't that right, Derek? We'll probably see him in a little bit. My buddy ScholarVid, Grant Farmer. I appreciate you for joining in the chat. The Stevening. James. What's up, James? Kirk. The Storm. Uncle Jesus. Hallelujah. Let's see. I just joined, but I disagree. I don't know what that is pertaining to.
Yeah, maybe it might be to the title of the Bart Ehrman video. Maybe he's a mythicist. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. So that's a good point.
That's my guess.
See, this is why I got you on. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Our buddy in Israel right now. What is going on? It's been a while since I've seen you. Thank you for joining the chat, Mr. Monster. Is up here saying, hey, Jay Bundy, Ricky Johnson, Jojo Freelancer, Non-Believer. Everybody's in the chat. So I just want to give you guys a shout out. And I want to say I really appreciate all of you who always show up and hit the like and comment and just show support and tell me when I'm wrong and let me know when I'm right and all that cool stuff, you know. But seriously, I appreciate the support. Also, everybody, if you didn't know, today, I just posted this on the community tab. Today is the last day to get the early, I guess you get the discount, right? So after today, if you want to sign up for Dr. Ehrman's webinar, for the Christmas webinar, it's going to cost extra. So if you wanted to sign up for the Christmas thing, I might even be hosting it. I'll be privileged probably to be hosting it for our friend, Dr. Ehrman. And if that is the case, I'd love to see MythVision family all up in there and give us some support while Dr. Ehrman talks about the mythical birth of Jesus. And I say mythical because that's the side we lean, right? We're on that side. However, if you think there's a historical Jesus like I do, where does history and myth meet? And is there anything historical about the birth narrative of Jesus, which is Christmas, being celebrated for Christmas? So look, Derek said, never mind. I found it on Google Maps. Neat. I don't know what he's talking about, but he's not my friend. I can tell you that much. That's all I can say. Not my friend. Just totally being sarcastic for those who take me too literal. Maybe you take me like a fundamentalist. Please go sign up. I'll post a link right now in the chat real quick for everybody who hasn't signed up for the Bart Ehrman thing. Here we go. There it is in the chat. So if you've considered to do that, that'd be awesome. It'd be cool to see you guys there, to be, in the chat and supporting, and then also the Patreon. I just dropped 8 new videos that have not been released to public. They're all Dr. Ehrman, or Carrier and Dr. Dennis McDonald videos, as well as, let's see, they're all that. They're all in the same vein. Here I go getting calls and stuff like that on my phone at the same time. So real quick, though, if you don't mind, Jacob, do me a favor and tell us what you're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in private, about my position on Paul, and I guess we can talk about my late dating of the letters of Paul. But I also want everybody to understand, I'm going to explain this carefully, that regardless of if Paul wrote in the 80s, 50s, or even after the war, and this is going to come up a lot in more conversations on my channel, that my issue with the mythicist position, my personal humble opinion on the matter, is that Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, says that he confronted James, that's the Lord's brother. He doesn't really call anyone else that in that specific way in his letters, that he is the Lord's brother. And most scholars, pretty much nearly every scholar, would agree that that means James is the brother of Jesus. And it's the same James that Josephus mentions, who is also called the brother of Jesus in Josephus. James, the brother of Jesus. Jesus was called the Christ. That's what Josephus says. And there are some people that will go further and say, well, that's a total interpolation in both passages, both the Testimonium and the James passage. And I don't agree with that, because if you look at Origin of Alexandria, he does tell us that Josephus does mention James, the brother of Jesus. He clearly cites which book he talked about it in Antiquities, book 20. And some people say, well, that's actually the brother of the son of Damnius, Jesus, son of Damnius. And the way I would put it, my specific issue with that is that, well, if that were true, if Jesus, the son of Damnius, was the brother of James, maybe the Jews would have calmed down. Oh, they made the brother of James the high priest, but they didn't calm down. They only got angrier. And then that Jesus was removed from the high priesthood after 3 months. Just 3 months in office, because he wasn't following the Torah correctly. There was something he wasn't doing right. And so James is Torah orthodox, James the Just.
Sorry, I was over here talking with the mic. This is a different Jesus, right?
Jesus, son of Damnius, is a different Jesus, yeah.
Right.
But there are some that will say that's the brother of James.
If I may, there's a debate coming up on your channel between James Stevens Viant and Richard Carrier on this very topic. Okay, so bring your popcorn and
it's going to be on
super chat your questions. Are you going to take super chat questions?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Yep, and obviously, despite my opinion on the matter, of course, will be neutral in the video. I'll ask these careful questions. Okay, why? Obviously, to Dr. Carrier, why do you believe what you believe? James Valiant, why do you believe what you believe? And the audience will decide who's right. But my personal opinion, Bart Ehrman, he talks about this in the interview I did with him, is that the James passage seems to refer to the Testimonium, Antiquities 18:3. It's a secondary reference to Jesus. That's why it says who was called Christ. That's past tense grammar. It's referring back to the Testimonium. And scholars use that to infer that the Testimonium is at least partially authentic, because there are some things that it says in there that Josephus couldn't have said, that Jesus is the Messiah, or that he is the Christ, like he's believing it as if he were a Christian. But he's not But he didn't write those things. He doesn't believe Jesus is a Messiah. He thinks Vespasian is a Messiah. He's very clear about this, that the Jews misunderstood their prophecies, that it was really Vespasian that was being foretold in the Old Testament as the coming son of David, the Messiah.
Interesting. Welcome to the show, James.
Hi. Sorry I was a bit tardy.
It's okay. You're going to get in full suspension for this.
I can give you grief because I thought we were starting a little later, but I should have been available, of course, at your command, gentlemen. You are two of my favorite people in this world. It is a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. I've already plugged the book and the website, creatingchrist.com. We did that at the intro, and we got a few super chats. Let's jump into some of these questions with people, and we'll be like rabbit trailing into different ideas because this is what we're so good at. We do this when we're not recording, actually. I wish we recorded every conversation we ever had. But anyway, Mr. Monster, thank you for the super chat. What would be real name of Christ, and when did the letter J come in? So
well,
English, you're dealing with English.
Letter J, if I remember correctly, it came in the 16th century CE is the earliest time that I think the English letter J shows up.
Well, in Latin, right? We have the
Latin
whole introduction of J and Janus. It was Julius Caesar, not Julius Caesar at all.
But Christ,
right?
The title Christ, though, is much, much older.
Yeah.
That really goes back even before Jesus. There is a text that uses that title. I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's one of the Book of Maccabees. It might be, I don't remember which one it is. It might be Second Maccabees or First Maccabees, one of them. I don't remember which one it is. But one of the Book of Maccabees does use that title. And Christ means anointed one, or even some would just say Messiah, basically. It's a denoting that somebody claims that he is Messiah. And most scholars do believe that Jesus's followers thought Jesus was the Messiah. And that he would come back after he died. And of course, the way the Gospels portrays that second coming, and which seems to be describing events that happened on 70 CE, the destruction of Jerusalem, the Son of Man descending from the clouds. And it seems like they thought, at least the Christians that were writing the New Testament thought that was Jesus. But if you look at Josephus, the way he describes that event, because he talks about descending from the clouds, he says the Roman army was descending from the clouds, which is really strange. And the person that's descending with them, the leader, is actually Titus. And Mark 13 seems to be shifting that, if you want to put it that way, to Jesus. Because I think the four Gospels use Josephus. Slowly, some scholars, but not many of them, but it's getting there, are coming to conclusion. Not just Luke, Acts, but all four of them, or at least the three synoptics used.
Interesting.
Josephus.
Interesting.
The name Jesus, of course, is very common in the works of Josephus. Apparently, there were lots of figures named Jesus in the first century, and it's typically understood to be a Greek rendering of Yeshua, Joshua, the Hebrew name, the hero of the Torah, one of the heroes of the Torah. But of course, that itself, even in the Torah, we're told Moses renamed Hoshea Joshua precisely to fit his messianic type role. He was Yahweh's salvation, and that's basically what the name means for the people. He was the first guy to part the Jordan River miraculously, as first century rebel leaders would claim they would do. So it has messianic significance. There's no question that the name Jesus has, if it's understood that way, as being a Greek rendering of Joshua, then of course it has messianic significance going way back in Hebrew literature to the Torah. It may have, the idea of the Messiah being a person named Jesus may have even been a formulated idea by the time of our Jesus. And so being messianic or being named Jesus is itself perhaps suspicious, but it's also plain that it was a reasonably common first name in the first century, the way Josephus uses it.
couple super chats here. We got another one. James and Jacob, only pick one. All right. Would you rather play poker with Ken Ham, fish with William Lane Craig, or golf with Frank Turek, and why?
You pick first, James. I've got to think about this for a second.
Kick my ass in every one of those.
I
guess you would have a discussion with. I don't know.
I do fish for William Craig.
Okay,
because I can fish.
I was going to say I love fishing.
Fishing is actually the funnest activity, right? See, golf is so boring. I mean, I did whatever I've tried golfing. It's like, okay, I like walking on grass, but that's basically what it is. Whereas fishing, there's some excitement. You get out, into a stream or something, and it's cool. We're on a boat. It's really cool.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much, Zach Johnson, for that super chat. And then our good friend from Israel says, James, tell us how Roman emperors create pizza.
It was all a conspiracy, really. As anyone who's read my book obviously knows, it all came from. It was a top-down conspiracy. It came from the emperor himself. He liked a certain dish, and it had to be. No, obviously, it's insane. The tomato, wasn't even discovered till the New World was, and the Neapolitan dish has very little to do with American pizza anyway. So,
Jesus,
go to Italy and you'll find out more about pizza, right?
Cheese.
Who invited this guy?
Who the hell is that guy? What the hell is he doing here?
Derek, we have an echo.
Am I even supposed to be here?
You showed up. Derek, we have an echo. I think, yeah, it's yours. I had to mute you. You have an echo on your side. So I don't know if you have headphones you could put in there. I think, yeah, it's yours. I had to mute you. So you're playing the video right now. That's what it is. Anyway.
Hey.
You're still playing your YouTube video right now.
Or it might suggest.
Oh.
There you go.
Voila.
Oh.
Aw. So James, we talked about this earlier this week, and Jacob was going to talk about Paul, and you were going to mention, we were going to go all over the place, but one of the big problems was this whole morality that you said was.
You are going all over the place, aren't you?
I know. It's a hangout. So what can we do? We can go from Christianity to. You were listening to my interview with Tom Jump, which I got to set up like a debate/discussion with you guys at some point.
Oh, that would be so fun.
Yeah. So I don't know where we want to go. Jacob's already opened the door for Paul.
Well, see, and I think I generally agree with. I caught most of it, but only a bit of it. I generally agree with that position. It seems to me that unless there's a good reason to think that something isn't in Josephus, we stay with what's in Josephus, unless we have a real good reason to say that that was interpolated. Now, with the testimonium, we happen to have a real good reason that it was at the very least, tampered with. And that, in my mind, makes it impossible for us to really reconstruct any original testimonium. Understanding that, however, we turn to the James passage, and the James passage, just walking in the door, uses ultra-typical Josephine language. It's a typical Josephine argument. He uses the same kind of logic elsewhere, for example, in the John the Baptist passage. And more than that, the way Jesus is removed by our mythicist friends, and believe me, I have tremendous respect for Carrier, and no doubt about that. But it seems to me odd already because we've removed the cause of James's death, which, had there been an earlier Jesus passage, would be already built into the explanation. That's why this dude was killed. And so by removing Christ from that James passage, he removes the cause that was already built in for James's death. Moreover, when he mentions Jesus, the son of Damnius, being appointed high priest because Ananias had killed this popular James guy, he doesn't tell us that was the reason why he was appointed. He just says it makes sense of the passage because it would be the brother of the guy who'd been killed. But that would still be odd. Why didn't he just call the guy James, the son of Damnius, and Jesus, the son of Damnius, who had been appointed because he was the brother of this other guy. But more than that, why would the high priests have appointed the brother of a guy who they wanted to have done in, an enemy of their position, their politics? It logically makes no sense that the brother of a guy they were so interested in, that the high priest wanted executed despite Roman resistance, that they would appoint his brother. That would be like letting an enemy into the fold. Moreover, it does make a hash out of, as Jacob was pointing out, it makes a hash out of the narrative. It did not appease, had no causal effect. It did not appease the poorer priests, etc., etc., etc. And maybe on a more technical note, it would be the only time we see in Josephus a repetition of the identifier. So, for example, according to Carrier, the reconstruction would be James, the brother of Jesus, the son of Damnius. Well, in the next passage, he's called Jesus, the son of Damnius. Nowhere else in the work of Josephus does he repeat the identifier unless he introduces a new guy named Jesus. So that would be a unique instance because we'd know who this Jesus is already, presumably. There'd be no need to repeat who he was. Would be, Josephus is kinder to his readers. He would tell us he was appointed high priest because he was that other dude's brother, which, alas, for Dr. Carrier, he does not. So given the balance of the evidence, I think we're working really hard. We know Origen had a pre-testimonium tampered with version because he insists that Josephus says he's not the Christ. So that part, at least, if not a whole bunch of more, was tampered with and added by later Christians. On the other hand, Origen would not be getting hopping mad. And, you know, another part of Carrier's argument that I find odd is he says, Origen nowhere refers to the testimonium or quotes it. Well, he knows perfectly well that many of our references are not direct quotations, but oblique references. We only know it because we have the original, that it's an oblique reference to this later thing. So we don't know that Origen doesn't fully cite the original testimonium as it did exist. That is it seems to me a spurious argument anyway. And finally, we've got St. Jerome, who apparently also had an uncleaned up version like Origen, because he says called the Christ. And Jerome is one of our most careful Christian writers out there. I think one of our comparatively more honest Christian writers. So on balance, I think the evidence suggests that the James passage is correct. And the James passage infers another such passage. If I'm using X to identify Y, and I say the previously mentioned or the aforementioned, it can be translated either way, Jesus called the Christ, then I'm referring to that guy, Jesus, I called the Christ in the previous passage. And that's the general logic that scholars have for decades used about the existence, at least, of some second passage about Jesus Christ. Bart Ehrman recently used it himself, but scholars for decades have been making that logic. So there's little doubt of that.
Real quick, I got an echo pretty bad. So, and I've been hearing a slight echo. Everybody mute if you're not talking. And then when you go to talk, you'll be the one who unmutes. You can also communicate in the private chat in here and like say, hey, I'd like to go next, if something like that, just because there was a serious echo. I always prefer people wear headphones if for whatever reason, because of this is the best way to do it. I'm trying to talk to Derek. Don't tell Derek I'm talking about him right now because he's so dumb and he doesn't even get it. But, you know, don't tell him I said that, though. Okay.
Right.
I love Derek. You know that.
My point on this would be is that since the John the Baptist and the James passages are positive references, Josephus is nothing but glowingly positive, which is an unusual thing. All of these messianic innovators of the first century are baddies as far madmen, innovators, whatever else Josephus calls these guys. It's extraordinarily unusual that Josephus should whitewash, in effect, messianic leaders such as John the Baptist, James, the brother of the so-called Christ, or Christ himself. And if the James passage was positive, then I think inferentially it's probably the case that whatever was in the original testimonium, it was just as positive. Although it probably left out any of the wonder-working stuff or followers among the Greeks and his tribe of Christians still exists. I think any of those elements are dubious on the face of it.
Interesting. Okay, couple super chats. Mr. Monster wants to hear you, and thank you for the super chat. He would like to hear James talk about dolphins and anchors, but maybe keep that in your mind, dolphins and anchors, because I'm sure I'd like to get a response maybe from one of you guys on the chat about that. And then John Gear, I hope I'm saying your name right, my friend. Of course, this is our friend on Facebook as well. My last name is Gear, rhymes with tire. Geyer. Okay. Dude, I should have read before I even said his name. All I had to do was read the dang super chat. Anyway, John Geyer, thank you so much. Since Derek has an Oculus Quest now, can we get the 4 of you in VR chat room soon? That is, Derek can pry it out of his girlfriend's hands. That's obviously not to me. That's definitely to you.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen Candace, my girlfriend that he's talking about, but she's a big girl. The likelihood that I'm likely to, pry it out of her cold dead hands. It's not good, John. That's a big woman we're talking about. Come here. They're talking about you.
Hold on. She's gonna kill you.
Look at how muscular.
That's pure intimidation right there. That's scary as hell.
That is.
John Geyer
is always one of the most precious golden things. I got to say, I had to throw that in. Her principled silence is really a remarkable and wonderful thing.
Well, she's a good old girl. You know what I mean? Down yonder, she's a good old girl. I'm just teasing. Thank you, John.
She's a good old girl from down here in Paducah, Kentucky. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I'm ruining this whole conversation. You all talk about yourselves.
Before we go into Mr. Monster's thing, Joel, you are new on the scene here. We've interviewed before in the past. Welcome back to MythVision and hanging out. Did you want to make a comment in particular pertaining to maybe what James said, and then we can get to the fish and anchor or the dolphin and anchors from Mr. Monster?
I'm interested to hear about the dolphins and anchors. I mean, I read James's book and I think it's really good. But yeah, I mean, with the Josephus passage, there's quite a lot of things, obviously, that we minor disagreements that we have on there, and you know my position already anyway.
Yeah.
But I did wonder if you just said Christ to someone from Josephus's audience, would they have associated it with that particular cult, or was it too small and unknown at the time to make that association? Would they have to explain what is a Christ? Why is this significant? Would they just go, I don't see the connection. What does this mean apart from anointed? I mean, is it a Jewish thing? So wouldn't Josephus have explained that?
I think it's an amazingly good question, a brilliant question. We have it probably, what most scholars regard as a completely separate figure from our Jesus Christ. We have a reference to a Crestus out of the sheer blue in a Suetonius biography of Claudius, and he appears to treat that as a proper name. So it could be that a generalized pagan audience, even Josephus's generalized pagan audience, would regard Christ as simply, a name. Now, if you were in the know and you knew what that meant, then you would know that that meant some sort of a king, messianic figure, priest, someone anointed in the Jewish tradition, at least. And you'd have at least that much. If you had a broader, more pagan understanding of these things, maybe influenced by Philo or something, you might have a broader idea that, it's somehow connected with the good or pagan religions as well. So depending on your level of knowledge, it might be a title, it might be a name. And so I think that would be the best answer to that. On the other hand, I think we do have, there's no reason for that in itself to be problematic within Josephus's text, but it does seem to point to the reality. Although we know there were many messianic claimants in the first century, it seems to be the only one that Josephus gives the title to, which is in itself a remarkable thing, which I think makes us wonder not so much about the historical, and let me put it to Joel in general. To me, even if these Jesus references in Josephus are correct, and they're in the original Josephus, they're not much evidence of a historical Jesus in and of themselves. Come on. Josephus is a biased writer. We know he's a dissembler in many ways. I wouldn't put it past Josephus to invent a whole character. Now, in general, if Josephus mentions a character in a general to a pagan audience who just lived in the last century through these events, most of these characters are probably real dudes. and women. But I wouldn't put it past Josephus to invent a character or to embellish a character or to whitewash a character. See, in the cases of John the Baptist and James, I think those were for sure historical figures, and Josephus has gone out of his way to, unusually for Josephus, whitewash these characters morally. And that I find a remarkable thing.
Yeah, I remember Jesus ben Ananias looked suspiciously convenient for Josephus, spreading a message that Josephus liked, and sort of disappears after the story just exists. And I think that was in a sequence of events that he was talking about, which other ones were made up. So he could well have invented that character too. Yeah.
Many historicists will say that, using Mark 13, will say that an apocalyptic prediction of the doom of the temple or the tomb of Jerusalem may have been original to a historical Jesus. But it seems to me that a much more plausible explanation is that there was a dude, Jesus ben Ananias, who in the years just before the war, when it would be more plausible to predict a disastrous end to a war that was almost inevitable at that point, would be going around saying, woe to Jerusalem, woe to Jerusalem. Now, his end, I think, is fully mythological. How he just, woe to me, and then he gets hit by the big artillery rock. I think Josephus has embellished the story. Again, Josephus is not a terribly credible writer. On the other hand, I'm willing to believe that there was some other dude who predicted the destruction of Jerusalem closer to the event, who was the actual historical inspiration for Mark 13.
And of course, you can do the old confirmation bias. Just pick out the one guy who was right, and then write about it.
Right, of course. Well, it's like with dating ranges. You notice how they always put it at the earliest day. I think Ken Humphreys was telling Jacob that the other day. And of course, it's true. When you're given a range, what is this apologetic bias? Even among scholars, very frequently, to give it the very earliest possible date in the range because we want it closer to the historical reality. Well, that is, of course, total bias.
Well, like when the Bible says there will be wars and rumors of wars. It's always right.
Right. When isn't that the case? Wars.
Yeah. James, can you address the dolphin and anchor ordeal for our friend Mr. Monster?
Well, there are a lot of different ways of approaching that.
I guess like do a drive by an airplane view.
Drive by, 10,000 meter elevation sort of.
Just say, okay, this was used by these particular people within the Greek, then Roman empires, and of course it gets adopted into Christianity, or might have been there from the start. At least a version of Christianity, maybe. Let's say, because there were so many sects of Christianity out the gate. It's kind of interesting to think maybe one of them had a Roman provenance.
Well, our earliest physical evidence for Christianity still remains the Catacombs of Rome, which is a remarkable thing. And the earliest of those catacombs, the Catacombs of St. Domitila, reported to be the legendary burial ground of Flavia Domitila herself, is identified as a Christian site, and its earliest inscriptions are identified as Christian precisely by the use of fish and anchor imagery. Fish and anchor imagery. We're all familiar with how the very Greek term ichthys, fish, is itself a name game on the titles of Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, and how fish was used as a symbolic reference to Jesus. And we're also familiar how fish were perhaps the most common reference to the followers of Jesus. I'll make you fishers of men, Jesus says, even symbolically in the text of the Gospels. So fish were both a symbol for Jesus and his followers. What people are less aware of is that in those same catacombs, in preference to a cross in the first couple centuries of Christian imagery, that is the 2nd and 3rd centuries, this is before Constantine, in the catacombs, by far the anchor was used more than the cross as a symbol for Jesus. A very curious thing. And I mean by far more frequent, the anchor was used as a symbol for Jesus. People have thought that this was sort of a disguised cross. But of course, to know that it would be a disguised cross would require the same inside knowledge that it would take to know that the cross was a Christian symbol. So that argument has never made much sense to us. And scholars have come to the point where they realize the catacombs were not hiding grounds, but in fact, well-known places where Christians worshipped and did their activities. And on the grave sites, they used these symbols quite sincerely. So they were sincere Christian symbols in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Now, where do they come from? Where do they come from? Well, we know anchors were used, for example, on Jewish coins in the 1st century BC without any fish. That would he made it into a graven image in violation of the big 10 commandments, right? And so, what's a remarkable thing about Christians is this use of fish is clearly a graven image. It symbolizes Jesus as well as the followers. Well, rattling around in everyone's pockets were anchor and fish images that had been produced in the millions by the Flavians. And the earliest Christian writer, Clement of Alexandria, to note the anchor and the fish as Christian symbols, said they came from Seleucus, the Seleucids. Well, that's exactly where the Flavians got their image. And it wouldn't be a weird coincidence if Titus, the guy who minted all these, and distinctly for a Roman emperor, only he, and for a short time his brother, and then later Hadrian during the Second Jewish Revolt, ever used this image at all on Roman coinage. But even as Christians are using this image in the earliest catacombs, it's being used as a symbol for the Emperor Titus, who himself claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. And we know this was an active part of Flavian propaganda. The second-century historians Titus and Suetonius don't just say that the Flavians claimed this, they themselves believed that the Flavians were this, and tell us point blank that yes, Vespasian and Titus were in fact the messiahs of Hebrew prophecy, as events turned out. Josephus himself says Vespasian, a Jew, writing Roman propaganda, of course, but we're also interestingly told in the Talmud that Ben Zakkai, the father of the rabbinic school at Yavne, claimed, probably for political reasons, that Vespasian was the true Messiah. So this must have been an important part of Flavian propaganda. So we found it, my co-author and I found it curious that the earliest Christian symbols for Jesus and his followers should come from the same source as the Flavians, and that the Flavians should be the ones using these images, and that the niece of Titus should be the source of the earliest, should be the her burial site should be the earliest Christian Roman catacomb as such, and that the very symbols that we identify both as Flavian and as Christian are the very same symbols.
Wow. Would they also be symbols of Apollo, though?
That's right, but clearly neither Christians were referring to it in that sense. And interestingly enough, not just Titus. He meant more than that as well. To the Seleucids who originally used it, it had a specific meaning. They claimed to be the descendants of Apollo. And the earliest use of this image can be found way back, centuries BC, on the island of Delos, which is the reputed birthplace of Apollo. And I've been there myself. It's loaded with these anchor and dolphin images. You can't swing a dead cat on Delos, which is a small enough island anyway, without seeing a dozen of these images. Homer, back in the 8th century BC, has a story of Apollo turning himself into a dolphin. So yes, it's associated with Apollo. And the Seleucids claim to be descendants of Apollo, and that's why they used it. The Flavians made no such claim. The first emperor, Augustus, did make such a claim, but didn't use the symbol, which is interesting enough. Augustus says that his mother Attia was in the temple of Apollo, and a snake came crawling up her, and he impregnated Augustus in that manner. He's the son of Apollo. And Apollo-like imagery is used by Roman emperors. But by the time we get to the Flavians, they're associating themselves with Apollo in the guise of Serapis. Serapis was Osiris himself, as well as being Asclepius and Apollo. That's the interesting thing. On one side, we'll see Vespasian or Titus, and on the other side, we'll see Serapis. Tacitus tells the story of how Vespasian performed healing miracles in the Serapeum of the healing god Serapis in Alexandria. So the Flavians regarded themselves more as a new Serapis. That would be their association with the image. But they also, interestingly enough, claim to be Jewish messiahs. And within living memory, Christians picked up that symbol for their Jewish messiah, Jesus, and no other.
Real quick, is it Lyran? I always butcher your name when I try.
Well, neither. It's unpronounceable. It's like a Tulu. Yeah, it's more like a T.
I can't even do it. So tell us the Joshua real quick thing, and then I got another super chat I want to get.
You can call me the Arisen Liren because it's really late where I am and I woke up, so I rose for this occasion. I am arisen, just like pizza bread. Joshua, so Joshua's original name, well, it's Yorubal, but other than that, it's Yoshua bin Nun. Now, Nun is a letter in Hebrew, but it's also a type of fish. So the original Joshua was Joshua, son of a fish. So that's another connection, or it's a minor connection, admittedly, tying the biblical Jesus with another fish motif. So just another fish in the ocean, so to speak.
Well,
Nice.
Here we have in Hebrew literature Jonah, who was actually, according to ancient Hebrew literature, much older than Jesus, in the belly of a great fish for 3 days. And we're told about the sign of Jonah in Christian literature. So that's 3 days in a fish. And so Hebrews had already, and although Jonah is not himself directly a messianic figure, by then, I'm not sure the status of the Gabriel inscription, but if the early 1st century Gabriel inscription is any indication, the Jonah story had already been associated in Jewish thought with the Messiah. So I think the Jonah connection is still probably a bit stronger there, Laren, but fascinating, absolutely fascinating. The different fish connections we have as early as Hebrew literature, which would make it friendly and consistent to overlap all this. What's astonishing about Christian literature and Christian symbolism is that there's more than one moving part to each of them. We have pagan sources, we have Hebrew sources, and sometimes we have both pagan and Hebrew sources for what's being syncretized and put together and fused in the New Testament, which is really highly sophisticated. And I think scholarship is now finally coming to realize just how sophisticated in a literary and philosophical way the New Testament actually is.
I mean, Dennis MacDonald's work is all in this vein: eclectic mimicism, borrowing from the Hebrew Bible as well as the Greek epics. So he's all over that, and I think you're right on the money with this. Another super chat from the Dutch Radical. Thank you for the super chat. Is James, I think the 5th, I'm not sure what this is, V, the brother
That's
or
James
step?
Valiant.
Okay. So are you the stepbrother of Jesus? It's the question. I'm trying to.
Well,
Just to show how common these names are, one of my dear friends is Jesus from Mexico City, and my name is James. And they were common then, and the names are still common today.
Thank you for that super chat.
A lot of Joshua's around today.
And it's somewhere in
I've seen what James can do with a few bread and fish. There's no way he's not. There's just no way.
I was going to mention the Pythagorean numerology as well, actually.
Yeah, he's something else. I'm going to tell you. What were you going to say, Jacob?
I was going to quickly say, I think it's in 1 Corinthians. Paul, at one point, he brings up Moses, and then he brings up Joshua taking over for Moses, something like that. And in the way he writes it, it almost sounds like to me he is vaguely, comparing Jesus Christ to the Old Testament Joshua. And going back to the Jonah thing and the Gospel of Matthew, it does state plainly that, like Jesus spent 3 days in the grave before he rose from the dead, Jonah was in the fish for 3 days before he came out of the whale, or fish, whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's a direct comparison between Jesus and Jonah. And it's one of the classic examples of the New Testament basically telling us, it's getting a lot of its ideas from the Old Testament, recycling them onto Jesus.
Interesting.
Christians are masters of foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
No, please. The slaughter of the babies in Matthew's nativity scene comes straight from Pharaoh's killing the babies at the time of Moses.
Right.
Jesus, even, it's been noted by so many scholars, Jesus just giving the Sermon on a Mount is like Moses getting the law on Mount Sinai. Joseph's prophetic dreams in the nativity story. Well, in Genesis, we're told of Joseph interpreting prophetic dreams in Genesis and notice that the Holy Family goes to Egypt, where Joseph in Genesis interpreted his prophetic dreams. No, it's all an echo. Not all, but so much.
Sargon as well, so it wasn't even them that started doing that. I mean, they were copying from even earlier.
And now consider, add in Dennis MacDonald's insights into this. Add in Derek Bennett's insights into this. We have all these pagan parallels that are also seemingly, and I don't know the degree, Derek, to what degree they are self-conscious or not, and I know that's a debatable point, but if MacDonald is correct, there must be self-conscious that classical literature, the Athenian playwrights, maybe even Homer, are being self-consciously modeled in. What a sophisticated body of literature the New Testament really represents. To those in the know, it would only be allegorical references to literature they're very familiar with. To the masses, it might put one over on them. I'm not sure quite how to interpret that, but there are clearly blends. They're clearly a syncretizing of different religious elements to appease both pagans who are joining apparently this cult, as well as Jews who pro-Roman, pro-Hellenized, moderate Jews who are also now joining the movement. Seems plain to me.
Yeah, granted, I try to show caution in asserting any kind of genealogical links or borrowing, as some might say. You know, to some degree, there's just no denying that that's partly what's going on, because of what you have a lot of is competitive assimilation, where even polemic serves as a means of using your opponent's ideas against them. So, for instance, when John talks about Jesus doing his healing at the pool of Bethesda, where Asclepius was widely known to perform these kinds of healings, that's John's way of saying, hey, you know what? Forget about Asclepius. He's just a phantom. He's not real. Jesus really does accomplish the kinds of things that Asclepius couldn't ever really do. So that kind of one-upmanship, that kind of a competitive assimilation is absolutely a telltale sign that they did know of a lot of this stuff, and they were utilizing it toward their own end.
Right.
God,
Jesus,
I can't believe how much stuff I know. That's incredible.
But Jesus calms the storms because he's just as powerful as Poseidon. He walks on water. He's just like a son of Poseidon who can walk on water. They're aware of these competing, you know, Jesus makes wine. I mean, you make these points really well, all of them.
I have to. Gnostic Informant, thank you for the super chat. It's Jacobus Flavius Berman. For everybody who didn't know, the superior. Thank you so much for that super chat. I appreciate the love. And Jerry, yeah, Jerry says, I'll throw you a bone, Derek, for a great stream. Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate the love. Hey, Jacob, just a heads up. If you get any super chats, he is streaming over there on his as well. Send them to me. Message them to me. I'll just share them with the screen so everybody can, you know, see those. We can address them.
I got one, and it was from Jerry. And Jerry, thanks for the super chat, by the way. And basically, this is what he said. Yeah, he said, "Great panel, interesting stream. Thanks."
Awesome, Jerry. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you coming through from my boy Jacob. Always coming through, all of you. Derek, you hit the nail on the head. Honestly, like I think we're all on the same page, no matter where we land on historicity. Like we all agree, this is so obvious. And this has been my, I get flustered when I hear Dennis MacDonald talk about this and people are rejecting and denying like anything he's saying when it comes to this eclectic approach. I think it's silly. They all admit too, they're like, well, those, they'll use terms like echoes or like what seems to be awarenesses of that is just from the milieu. And Dennis is willing to even go at least somewhere and meet them. He thinks it's mimetic, but he'll go, you know what? Fine. If it is, why don't you mention it in any commentaries? You don't even discuss it. It's like you literally ignore it. Why are we ignoring the cultural milieu of the topics being brought up? Nobody's doing that. Now, they'll do it in Acts. Especially Pervo. Pervo's a gangster in the book of Acts. But the point is they're not doing that in the Gospels. They're not pointing this Homeric motif.
Well, for religious Christians, it would be obvious. We have a plan for your salvation, Derek, and anything that sounds similar is almost a threat. You know, the religion wasn't like we invented salvation to humanity. Of course, they didn't invent salvation cults at all. So even the existence, whatever the degree or whether there was an direct influence or not, just the existence of similar cults is a threat if you really buy into the Christian salvation idea. Right. I mean, right off the bat, it's a threat. But more than that, I think there are some people who still want to hold on sort of in an idealistic way to the uniqueness of Christianity in a romantic fashion. But the basic idea, the basic outline, as Derek has pointed out over and over, in religions that probably didn't even have any direct influence. I mean, the religions in the whole area were taking on the form. You've got this suffering deity whose own resurrection and apotheosis serves as the model for the hope of the followers' own afterlife. We see it again and again and again. Come on. They were simply sort of fitting the model that religion had taken in the region at that period and had been for centuries. So,
and if you haven't gleaned that from my work, let me know and I can yell it at you.
No, you've made it convinced me beyond a shadow of a doubt, sir.
I think Joel, you're going to want to say something, and Liren wants to say something too.
I was just going to say, if any of the people watching haven't bought John Loftus's latest anthology with Derek's great chapter in it, go do that.
That's a good point. Let me pop that up too. So,
thank you, Joe.
Let me.
Really enjoyed it.
I unmuted you, Liren. Just even a slight echo comes up, like when I'm talking.
Do you guys hear an echo?
Yeah, but no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Anyways, well, you know, Derek, you've got on your head a guy who is the last son of a planet who was sent to Earth, or a planet like Earth, in order to save it. And this is obviously a copy of the Prince from Another World. That's the guy who Superman copied. But you didn't see that coming, did you?
Isn't there a rap battles? I think there's a rap battle history with the two of them fighting each other. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's really good, and the ending is crap. I mean, we all know Goku would win. But anyways, like Superman, Goku copied Superman, but Superman copied another guy most people aren't aware of. So now they say, oh, Goku copied Superman, which is true. The thing is, when you're a writer and you're lazy, you just copy ideas left and right. It just happens because writing is done largely in the subconscious. So.
Yeah, I don't think it's lazy personally, and I don't think it's just copying. I do think there's competition of ideas, and I think that the creativity of these people, it was ingenious, the way that they developed it and remodeled things. The same thing goes for like Genesis. There's a recent issue going on right now between inspiring philosophy and what we see happening with Dr. Joshua Bowen and Kip Davis. And IP said in his response video, I got a slight echo. I'm going to go ahead and mute you real quick just to make sure. IP's like, look, man, I'm attacking these internet atheists that are saying that Genesis plagiarized these ancient Mesopotamian myths. And if you ask any of the experts in the field, like I think it's David Carr, I cannot remember. I know his last name's Carr, C-A-R-R. You go through all the experts in the field, and they're not going to call it plagiarism. It's not that. It's not plagiarism. They may borrow, they may mimic, they may have ways of regrafting, demythologizing, and having it as a polemic potentially against some of the other Mesopotamian literature and restructuring it. It's actually quite genius the way that they would do these things. But to invent it whole cloth and stuff, I guess to take a whole different level of creativity to come up with that. But who are you competing with? That's why they did these things. They want to polemicize, and they're engaging in competitive gods and deities and narratives and such, making themselves the chosen race among all the humans of the world and things like that. So it's a fun thing to get into. I just wouldn't use those terms because too often internet atheists, which I am an internet atheist, get this whole like, you call it plagiarism and they stole and this and that. And it's like, really, if you get technical into the scholarship, they're not using those terms, even if they think they borrowed from these things.
I'm perfectly open to the idea that other religions borrowed from Judaism. It's a back and forth. To think that these religions are hermetically sealed from one another is the mistake. I mean,
that's because Moses came first. Honestly, everyone copied Moses, don't you know?
Right. But as these religions are developing over centuries, first in an oral tradition, and then only later when it's written down and there's, you know, some definite we can all look at and even start comparing and criticizing notes on. I mean, even long before, but all through this period, to think that these religions are developing independently of one another in a hermetically sealed way is silly. We know that these cultures were trading, interacting, culturally being influenced and cross-influenced.
Do you mind if I make a more general sociological point on that as well?
Sure.
So basically, if you go too far off into creativity, you basically miss the cultural zeitgeist, and your works are not selected for preservation. So people who are, you see this in like the edges of fiction, the weird fiction that doesn't quite get into the mainstream. So anyone who did do entirely creative, non-derivative work, their works were lost anyway. So you had to just modify what was already there. And that's how syncretism is successful and still goes on today. I mean, the number of modern movies that are trying to make use of people's nostalgia, for example, that's an ongoing thing. That's part of human psychology going way back. So yeah, if you have something that's vaguely recognizable but new and fresh, that's what people latch onto.
Omega, thank you for the super chat. Funny how the proponents of the Gospels as Greco-Roman biographies reject any other Greco-Roman influence. Oh, thank you for that super chat. That's quite funny. It is interesting. I think that there's definitely more influence. And even Dale Allison Jr., right? Absolutely love the guy, knows more than I'll ever know, wrote his amazing commentaries on Matthew. The guy literally told me when we interviewed and I mentioned like these ideas of Roman influence, and he's like, I'm going to be honest, for 30 something years, I've lived in the Hebrew Bible. Like I've been trained as an expert to pay attention to that connection. So if Dennis sees something that I don't, and it may be there, I just don't know. And he says, I've never looked into it like that. So that is very...
We have Justin Martyr in the 2nd century saying, instead of getting the causal order correct here, if there was a causal order, look, he's saying, no, you see, God was giving us hints about Christianity. Christianity was hinted in all these pagan myths. I mean, Justin Martyr, the Christian, is saying that in the 2nd century, comparing Christianity to pagan myths in that early. Christians were recognizing the similarities. One of the earliest Christian forgeries is a correspondence between Seneca, the Stoic Roman philosopher, and Paul. So similar are so many of their ideas, and it has been noted by many scholars that one appears to be echoing the other, that in their minds, the early Christian minds, surely the two they were contemporaries, they must have known one another, and so Christians completely fabricate a correspondence between Seneca, who was the tutor of Nero, and St. Paul. Hard to believe, but the language also tells us that it's a late forgery, frankly. But still, the ideas are so similar and so connected that even early Christians, whether it was Justin Martyr or the forger of that correspondence, recognized the intimate connections between pagan thought and early Christianity.
I try to stay abreast of what apologists have to say about these kinds of things. For instance, if it's Justin Martyr or any of these other early church fathers, they'll say, no, they were exaggerating these parallels in order to save their hides. They're exaggerating in such ways to say, hey, what we believe isn't all that different, so, don't kill us, spare our lives, stop persecuting us. But if you go back and you look at the actual sources, if you read the primary source text, if you look at ancient iconography, what they were saying was on point. Go figure, they actually, having lived back then, knew what they were talking about. So this is just pure garbage coming from these apologists that Justin Martyr and others were having to stretch or exaggerate or make things up. No, they weren't. In fact, what they were actually saying was, hey, look, what we believe is legitimately not that dissimilar from what you believe. So spare our lives. Don't kill us. They're right about the message. They're just wrong to say that this stuff was exaggerated or fabricated. No, it wasn't.
Well, when you say spare our lives, don't kill us, is that a referral to like targeted persecution? Or because I mean, they were wealthy enough to be writing, they were influential enough for their works to survive. Professor
Candida Moss has shown that nearly all of the stories of Christian persecution during the Roman era are really literary and mythological. In her book, The Myth of Persecution, they're based on.
She mentioned empire-wide persecutions, but there were still.
Right.
Like there was local persecution.
Now, mind you, we do have evidence. I mean, as early as, I know it's controversial, but as early as Domitian, when he's cracking down within his own family on Clement and so forth, and exiling Domitila and so forth, we have some evidence, at least in Christian tradition and pagan history, of crackdowns on Christianity as early as Domitian, that is within the Flavian dynasty. So so it's already being, you know, and in maybe the earliest pagan evidence we have of Christianity, Pliny's Younger's correspondence with the Emperor Trajan, they apparently have to figure out the name Christian isn't enough to do it for them, you know, kill them all. They have to sort of sort through people calling themselves Christians. Are these ones that we can trust, or are these rebels, you know, maybe Jewish rebels? And so they have to have a test. You have to be able to do this prayer in front of images of Caesar, and if you can pass that test, that you can. But look, we know there were Christians in the Roman army by the end of the 2nd century, maybe a great number from the evidence at around Aurelius's time. And of course, all of those soldiers would have had to be able to pass Pliny's test and still be called Christians. So what we think of, our modern biases about what Christianity was and demanded of 2nd century Christians really needs to be questioned thoroughly.
Yeah. One more thing I'd like to say. When I went and visited Elaine Pagels, Professor Pagels, in person, I sat in front of her. She read Candida Moss's book. She said she thinks that Candida Moss went too far on mythologizing way too much of the persecution that did happen. This is her take, right? But she said, and this goes into the vein of like what we were just discussing about this persecution that's happening. She said this is what you were saying about the rich people who are writing. Like, would they be being persecuted? Irenaeus. Okay, so the book of Revelation was considered written by a heretic, by some of these early Christians. They're running, no, that book doesn't belong. And Irenaeus saw use for it and thought, this is speaking about us, you know, well after when it was really talking about what events were leading up to. But here he sees like those beheaded for the gospel. One of his close friends, she said, was actually killed and martyred. The way they did this was supposedly they didn't want to have to pay too much money for gladiators. They cost a lot. So he's writing one of these letters to the emperor saying, look, it cost a lot to get these gladiators. What do you think about us using condemned criminals, like actually convicted criminals, and putting them in there? And Christians fit that view of condemned criminals by the fact that they wouldn't bow down and worship the Caesar and stuff. So you had this competing cult, if you will. This is what Elaine Pagels is saying. Unfortunately,
we have very little concrete evidence of Christian persecution. We have, in fact, more evidence that, for example, Tertullian reports to us that Roman governors would frequently work to get Christians off any accusations. The accusations were coming from pagan neighbors and stuff like that. But consider the Christian writer Clement of Alexandria. He has the brand name Titus Flavius Clemens. He was a Roman, not just a descendant of Flavian freemen, but from the face of it, his name suggests he's a descendant of Flavians themselves. These people were educated. Very few people at the time were well educated. There's reasonably sophisticated scholarship going on here. These people cannot have come all, at least, from the lower classes. That's hard to believe. I mean, even going back to Paul's letter to the Philippians, he's apparently in contact with everyone in the Praetorian Guard and can send greetings from everyone in Caesar's household, and mention someone like Epaphroditus, who's helping emperors run the world. So
I have a hard time believing he's going around.
Disagreement on that. Yep.
Yeah, I have a hard time. Like, think about it. Can you imagine him trying to make a contract with Peter and James, and he's like, "I'll bring you money, like a few shekels a week or so, or a few shekels a month." It's like, nah, you better be bringing some money, boys.
Some dough. Yeah, it has to matter to them.
I think the broad point is an issue, though. But so if Elaine was saying, or should I say, Dr. Pagels was saying that she was downplaying the persecution. So Professor Moss was saying it's the targeted persecution specific to martyrdom. So that's what she was trying to debunk. So like, if someone was going to be executed because they were gathering without a license or all of that stuff, that doesn't really qualify as martyrdom, because the point of the martyrdom is to say, will you recant your faith? And then if you don't recant your faith, then you're executed. They have to have the option of getting out of it. If they're just a criminal who's being prosecuted for breaking the law, it's not the same thing as being persecuted specifically because you belong to Christianity.
Interesting. And until Christianity became a political force, that is to say, so popular that politicians were actually either associating with it or criticizing the leaders who were associating with it, now it is a political issue. And therefore, you know, you have, by 250, I think you have a law that's at least temporarily enforced against Christians, but then has to quickly be undone. And Constantine's faction is obviously pro, Christianity, and the factions against him are more critical of it. So by then it's a political force. And the earliest references, such as in Tacitus, to Nero allegedly blaming Christians for the Great Fire of Rome in 64, just make no sense on the face of it. But they make perfect sense when we think of Jewish rebels. And so if, just 2 years before the outbreak of the Jewish War in 66, credible scapegoats would surely be the Jewish rebels. And in Tacitus's mind, just as in Suetonius's mind, there's a confusion between who these Christiani are, or in Pliny's mind, there's a confusion as to who these Christiani all are. Are they rebels, or are they? Because if you look at the New Testament, it's obviously so heavily pacifistic and pro-Roman, and pay your taxes, render unto Caesar, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, slaves obey your masters, centurion has more faith than any Jew. The whole passion narrative is an allegory for Jewish guilt and Roman innocence, obviously fiction, but still an allegory in all four Gospels that alleviates the Romans of guilt and pins it squarely on the Jews in that fictional allegory found in all four Gospels. So it's so heavily pro-Roman and so pro-peace and so obey, and rebellion's a sin in Romans 13. In fact, the Roman government are God's appointed agents on earth, according to Paul in Romans 13.
And I think...
why would they persecute these people?
I think that what's going on with Tacitus is also connected to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, when Paul says, do you follow me, or do you follow Cephas, or do you follow Apollos, or do you follow John, or do you follow Christ? And I always found that to be very interesting to me, because he distinguishes his own followers, even Apollos and Cephas and John, with specific followers of Christ. Which is interesting to me. So varieties of Christianity when we look at Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and that's probably connected with Tacitus portraying Christians almost like they were these Torah Orthodox Jewish rebels.
That seems like a rhetorical device, though, doesn't it? So when he says, "Do you follow me or do you follow Christ?" is he supporting the people who follow him, or is he criticizing the people who follow him and saying you should be following Christ?
I tend to think he's being critical, especially given the fact he said, I confronted Cephas to his face in Galatians.
And then in the passage we're talking about, that's not even in Galatians, he was trying to argue against factionalism. He said, oh, you're of Cephas, and you're of Apollos, and you're of Paul. Well, get rid of all that crap. Get rid of all that nonsense. I don't want divisions. It's so funny because in Galatians, as you point out, Jacob, he himself is involved in a heated confrontation. I confronted Cephas to his face because he was a damn hypocrite and once ate with Gentiles. And even James didn't make it Titus get circumcised. So they're all just a bunch of hypocrites anyway. And they're damned and they're condemned, and I don't care who they are. So here's Paul in Galatians.
But they were best friends.
But that's what, frankly, that's one of the things that makes me think Galatians is authentic. Jerome, when he was translating the New Testament into Latin for the first time, he was so disturbed. He actually corresponded with Augustine and the Pope, and just, what is it? St. Paul is having this heated argument where he's condemning St. Peter and St. James, the leader of the Jerusalem church. He was so disturbed about this conflict, this argument, and hadn't Jesus cleared it up in the Gospels? I mean, after all, Jesus said it's not what you put in that's impure, it's what comes out of your body that's impure. So why didn't Paul just cite Jesus on kosher diet rather than confronting Cephas? So scholars, I think, have correctly identified Paul as the originator of the Torah critical aspect of Christianity. Otherwise, I mean, Jesus, if there was a historical Jesus, he was not the hero of the Gospels. He, like James and Cephas, would have been Torah Orthodox. Mm-hmm. And though stuff like that would have been inserted into Jesus's mouth later by our gospel writers.
Exactly. I think
Matthew specifically, yeah.
Let me get this super chat, guys. They've been waiting for a while, and then and if you get any, by the way, let me know, Jacob. Just put in the private chat. Mr. Smith, why would Christianity be adopted by Rome as a Jewish created religion with a pagan framework? Wouldn't that give too much credence to the Torah? And Liran was saying that like 10% of Rome was like the Jewish people. So that's a large quantity of people. But would you guys want to tackle this question?
If you don't mind, just a background point in general. The people of the time respected antiquity in religions. So any religion that could claim to hark back to the ancient days had already a stamp of approval, really. And it didn't matter too much what it said, because then you just build on it and you put your own ideologies on top of that. But the antiquity is the key point there.
We know as a fact the Romans utilized Judaism for propagandistic purposes. How do we know this? Josephus, just for one. Josephus is defending Judaism in Antiquities and in Against Appian. Now, he's defending a watered-down version. He, like Paul, doesn't believe in circumcision, for example. He's Pauline in that regard. You can imagine he's working with Romans. He couldn't be Torah Orthodox, Josephus himself, claim as many times as he does that I'm Jewish, but he is defending Hebrew scripture and Hebrew history and its antiquity, as Joel points out. And that in itself gave Judaism cachet. But we also know from his works that the Roman government itself was perfectly willing for their propagandist Josephus to appeal to Jews and pagans in that way and to use Judaism for their own propagandistic purposes. We saw that the Flavians claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. The Romans are aware of Judaism, to some degree respect it, are trying to utilize it. Consider the story of James's death. It was when the Roman governor was gone that the high priest took advantage of that to have James killed. And that's what got that high priest booted out. He did it without Roman. The Romans were so sensitive politically. Now consider that, what that implies. The Romans were ultra sensitive to the execution of even Messianic ideologues out there. And you'd really have to have cleared it with the Romans, apparently, if some famous ideological leader was being executed. That's what that implies, right? And not only that, it implies James was a rather important ideological leader. In fact, Josephus' very mention of him suggests, whether we accept Origen's version or not, that the original Josephus actually said the death of James was the cause of the war. Now, our version of Josephus does not have that in there, but Origen insists that was in Josephus. If that's correct, then of course that makes James a rebel leader.
And I think
pre-Pauline Christianity, not some obscure movement, but the rebel movement.
And speaking on that, I like what Professor Eisman says in his epilogue to James, the brother of Jesus. He says, "Who and whatever James was, so too was Jesus." I think that's perfect, because that's exactly what that highlights.
Look, a dude who'd be crucified by the Romans was not crucified because he said, render unto Caesar, he was crucified because the Romans thought he was one of these.
All that centurions have greater faith in him than Jews.
No. If the Sanhedrin had in fact convicted him of violating Mosaic laws, the Gospels tell us, they would have had him stoned, which they could have done at the time. Josephus makes very plain that the Jews had the authority to do Josephus quotes us the letters from the Roman authorities that gave the Jewish authorities the right to enforce the Mosaic law at that very time. When the Gospel of John says, the Sanhedrin said, we have no law to put Jesus to death. Well, that's totally anachronistic. It applies to the time John was written, after the Jewish war, when their authority was taken away, but it does not apply at the time of Jesus. In fact, there are echoes in the Gospels itself that they stoned people, like the sinning woman or the stoning of Stephen, who was also convicted by the Sanhedrin. Stephen may be mostly a mythological story, but stories like that themselves indicate that the New Testament remembers that the Sanhedrin could have had you stoned. So why on earth was Jesus stoned if he went against Torah? That's not...
So should we leave out the line at the end of the question that says, wouldn't that give too much credence to the Torah, and just go back to why would Christianity be adopted by Rome? Because I think that's a broader question, which some of the listeners might not know about.
Yeah.
It is obvious.
Well, another thing in answer to Mr. Smith's question here is that, scholars and historians often talk about God-fearers. These were Gentiles at the time who very much appreciated Judaism. And to Joel's point, which is a really on point, people back then did have an immense amount of respect and admiration for anything that had a sort of immense antiquity and mystique to it. I mean, it's for that reason that they loved ancient Egypt and ancient Egyptian culture and religiosity and mysticism, which is why we find a lot of these ancient Egyptian ideas sort of filtering their way into the Greco-Roman world. It's why we see obelisks, Egyptian obelisks, all over Rome. It was the same kind of thing with Judaism. And what they really appreciated about it was this sort of ethical monotheism. Monotheism was already kind of becoming a trend, right? I mean, even Greek philosophers were beginning to speak to this. So they find in Judaism this sort of ethical monotheism that they very much come to appreciate. And there are apologists who say that only Judaism offered this. Well, that's not true. Some of the mystery religions did as well. Some of them were a little bit hedonistic, like the Bacchanalia and so forth. But other mystery cults did practice this sort of purity and asceticism and ritual pure kind of thing. They found that also in Judaism. So this ethical monotheism really spoke to them, given some of the trends that were already popular at the time, and given the immense antiquity and mystique of Judaism.
Hey, just letting everybody know real quick while I have Derek up on the channel, go subscribe to Derek Bennett Gump, and he has the YouTube channel right here. Make sure you go subscribe. Here it is in the chat for those of you who need to find a way to get on there. Go subscribe to my friend. He also plays a significant role in this upcoming book, Varieties of Jesus Mythicism, that was mentioned by Joel Pearson. So please go check him out. The book is here, of course, on Amazon as well. You just type in Varieties of Jesus Mythicism. Did he even exist? And of course, he plays a role in here. And he's not a mythicist, but there are so many things in common. It's really fun to see people like him go subscribe to my friend. I just wanted to give you a little plug there, bro.
Just one more thing on what Derek was saying.
Yes, I side with the mythicist on many things. Yeah.
Yeah,
I side with the mythicist on many things, even though I'm not strictly speaking a mythicist.
Oh yeah, we've had disagreements in the past. It's pretty great fun. But one of the great things about having an antiquated religion, or ancient religion, venerable religion, is there's a lot of written material. And if there's a lot of written material, conspiracy theorists can just latch onto that, and that's exactly the kind of person who would create these kind of cults. If there's a lot of material, you could do a lot of pesha, and a lot of pesha means you can create whatever you want. So that the most ancient religions with the most written texts are the ripest for creating your own cult and your own ideas and spinning off of that. But I don't think, did we go through why Constantine specifically would want to use Christianity? There's a really obvious reason, which is if the pagan temples have a lot of money and he can get a religion and use this religion which is less tolerant of other religions, which Christianity was sort of leaning in that direction as a monotheistic religion, it gives them an excuse to go and raid the temples and say, these gods are no longer in favor. This money is now mine.
Yeah, there's two really powerful factors that make Christianity almost irresistible, aren't they? One is that, unlike, say, Mithraism, Christianity was open to literally everybody. I think that had its origins in the Jewish conflict of the first 2 centuries. Paul kicks the door open to Gentiles in his pro-Roman, pro-Hellenized form of it, sort of as a critical response to the Jewish rebels who were so sectarian, right, and rebellious. And so for that specific cause in Christianity was just an accidental thing that gave it a feature that was a really powerful one. It was open to women, slaves, Greeks, Jews, you name it. Anyone could be a Christian. So it's promiscuously open to just about everyone, and I mean everybody. And on the other hand, it combined that with what you were saying earlier, monotheistic intolerance. What the Roman government was looking for was a way to culturally unify their various ethnicities into one single. And so, as Derek was pointing out earlier, with Sol Invictus and other cults, we were already seeing a trend of in the direction of monotheism on the part of the Roman government. And so it combined this wonderful monotheistic intolerance. Yeah, let's go raid those pagan temples, and we can impose this one religion on everybody, with open to everybody. Hey, women, slaves, everybody can join our cult. And those two things, by the 4th century, and Christianity had gained significant popularity on its own by then, those two features made it, I think, overwhelmingly, and the way it articulated so perfectly the Neoplatonic philosophy that I think had been rising in vogue culturally among the intellectuals in the Greco-Roman world.
You bring up a really good point, James. This is something that, you know how you always talk about written in response to Torah orthodoxy. That I'm telling you that becomes more true as I continue to research. When you look at 2nd century rabbis like Rabbi Akiva and his writings, The morning prayer, if you go read the book called Goy by Adi Ophir and Ishai Rosenzweig, the very prayer of the rabbis was, God, I thank thee, I thank you, that I was not born a woman and that I was not born a Gentile. Okay. Those two things, all you need is one more to say, well, I wasn't born a slave. Okay. If you have that third little, I wasn't born a slave, and maybe they write about this, maybe some of the rabbis do mention, I thank you, I'm not a slave. Those three things are the three things Paul is literally going against by saying, you don't have to be it doesn't matter if you're female or male. It doesn't matter if you're free or slave. It doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile. So to me, the people who try to put Paul's lessons within Judaism, is very difficult for me to fit that in the modern school.
I think it's impossible to deny whatever role you think that Jewish or Roman elites played in the creation of Christianity. And I grant you that is, to me, something I'm not exactly clear on myself. But I think the general proposition that the New Testament, there was no New Testament, obviously, but the earliest Christian literature, for all its variations, for all its contradictions and differences within itself, New Testament literature, the earliest Christian literature, represents a critical response to the militant, nationalist, sectarian, Torah Orthodox Jewish rebels, Messianic Torah Orthodox Jewish rebels of the first 2 centuries. A critical response in every one of its particulars down the line, including this praise for Roman centurions, which does seem rather bizarre. But when you look at the Torah Orthodoxy criticism, the sectarianism criticism, the internationalism, the pacifism, it is a critical response to the rebels hijacking their own idea of Messiah.
Another super chat, family. Shireen, thank you so much for the support. Anytime I see a super chat, you know, I always appreciate you. You help keep the channel going. Tacking the new to the old test was to help validate Rome's full colonization of, I think, economy. I'm not sure. Political, political, and social levels, bending the Torah to be inclusive. I think it's right in the vein of
they didn't really bend the Torah so much as just co-opt it in.
We have the Roman version. See, the Romans were sponges culturally, and they knew that the cultures that they came to, especially when they went east, were much older and much more sophisticated. So when they first came to the Greek culture, they just sort of adopted it. They brought in Greek tutors for aristocratic Romans, brought in Greek tutors for their kids, starting at around the time of the Second Punic War, when they conquered Macedonia, conveniently enough, and had all these Greek slaves. But more than that, the Romans really adopted Greek religion, Greek philosophy. You know, Cicero and Lucretius are reading their Aristotle. Seneca is reading his Plato and Epicurus. Come on, Greek culture, we all know. Virgil is simply copying Homer, right? So we know that the Romans are sponges, but more than that, they are adopting each religion and giving it its own Roman flavor. And so we have even the enemy culture of the Parthians. Their god is Mithras, and it's the Roman version of this god. And you can go throughout Europe. You will find Roman aristocrats with their inscriptions to a Roman god side by side with the Romans' dedication to the local deity. That's what the Romans were doing, absorbing the local before they went monotheistic. Their first idea, and the reason why the Roman Empire was so flexible and lasted so long, is they were tolerant of and absorbed foreign cultures. And so there was a temple to Isis early on in Rome. Roman people were worshiping Isis, and it was a fad among Roman aristocratic ladies. They had to stamp it down, tried to stamp it down, and then they just gave up and let the Egyptian cult flower in Rome. Romans were absorbing foreign religions left and right. If there were no Roman version of Judaism, it would be a gap. It would be a lacuna. Let me suggest Christianity fills that lacuna.
Well, Christianity eventually grew to fill that, but yeah, obviously you got Josephus before that as well. But
if our classical people are telling us the truth, it's filling it from the start.
Well, what did you think of Ehrman's claim in The Triumph of Christianity, where he said that given the growth rate of Christianity, it didn't even require Constantine, he just accelerated the process, but Christianity was on the path to dominance in Rome anyway?
I agree with two things in a big way. I think some form of Eastern mystic version of Neoplatonism would have taken over. Those ideas were just becoming so overwhelmingly popular and irresistible, especially during the politically insecure crisis period after the Severans, when emperors were lasting no more than a year or two, and there was political insecurity for almost the better part of a century. These Eastern religions were coming in. Severans helped them, by the way. These Eastern religions were coming in. Neoplatonism was taking over the day. So
isn't Christianity seems to me to be closer to Platonism than Neoplatonism, because Neoplatonism just seems a bit more Aristotelian.
I'll agree with you to some extent. I think that they are less Aristotelian than, say, Plotinus. But Plotinus, come on, is really just Plato with monotheistic God. And in some ways, Christianity is just Plato with the Jewish God replacing the form of the good. So I agree. In some ways, there's more direct Platonism in Christianity, what I call naked Platonism. Don't store up treasures here on earth, store them in the kingdom where they don't perish. That's
and the concept of perfect forms in the heavens.
But notice, Joel, that just like Plotinus is totally displaced Plato's form of the good with his the one, so the Jewish God is now like Plotinus's the one. And I think the first step on that trip was Philo, right?
Yeah, Philo, that seems to have been hugely influential. If not directly, then at least his school of thought.
Hey,
bridge.
Want to give a shout out. Welcome, Caleb, to the chat, my friend. I appreciate it. He is a Christian, and I'm glad he's joining us to hang out today. Sorry if we commit too many heresies for you, Caleb. Actually, I don't see that happening. You're too cool.
Jesus didn't exist.
Yeah, thank you. He's a mythicist. No, welcome in. Thanks for joining in. We got another super chat. Jason Stewart, feel free to find your way into the conversation. And Derek, when you were still a Christian, if you found out Jamesian Christianity was more authentic and also anti-Paul, would you have become an Ebionite? To be honest with you, I think that I had no clue. In fact, I was all about harmonization. So if I were to figure out that early Christianity had a split like that, I think doubts would have came in sooner. I don't think I would have just been like, all right, I'm going to go and stop eating meat because it like go to the full extreme, hold Sabbath, like all of that. I'm not going to say it's not possible. Like this is coulda, woulda, shoulda, and what would be hypothetically the case. Most likely I'd have been like, hold on. Because my whole foundation was inerrant infallibility and like a fundamentalist approach to the Bible. So if I'd have found out that the authors within the New Testament like weren't really on the same page and it was like a complete divide, I would have gone, what am I looking at? What's going on here? And that's actually what I've started to figure out. Like maybe it wasn't as unified as we think, as there's people harmonizing Paul and James and Peter. What's going on? Are they really that close? Or was there a split in the early community, a permanent split? Or was it like that from the get? I don't know. When Paul may have left whatever maybe the earlier community could have been. I don't know. There's a lot of different theories out there that to me, but those are the questions. If I had, I don't think I would have followed Jamesian Christianity. That's my opinion.
Well, did you find out about the implications of Acts before or after you left Christianity?
After. Yeah, after. That was all stuff I started to like look at later on. And I'm still in love with the Bible. I tell that all the time to people. Like, I love this stuff. And it's not because I ontologically believe it. It's a hobby of mine, how this had its claws in me so deep. And it's not like just some random thing. Like I'm into tennis. No, this impacts people in serious ways, politically, in everyday life, psychologically. There's a lot of things that negative and sometimes positive in which this plays. So I'm more interested in looking at it kind of like, let's take this and see, what is this? What is religion? What is it doing for people? And how can we better? Since I know it's not going anywhere, we're not going to get rid of all of this tomorrow. It's best that we figure out how we can improve, how we can try to understand the believer. And being one, I empathize, just like I was a drug addict. I empathize with heroin addicts, people who struggle with addiction. I know the harms that can come from that. I know some people who know how to moderate. I don't know how they drink beer like normal individuals. At the same time, beer's not bad. I mean, it's not. I'm the one who doesn't know how to act. So when it came to religion, I must admit, frankly, up front, I do not know how to act right with religion because God saw everything I did. And it was, I mean, I'm like obsessively OCD and ridiculous to the point it harmed me. It was another addiction to me. It just wasn't good. It wasn't good. So anyway, hope that answers your question. And thank you. Flip Flopsky, thank you for the super chat. Christianity took advantage of the power of human sacrifice without actually sacrificing a human.
Did they, though? It depends whether Jesus existed, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, Jews died. Like, there's some people who think that Jesus is a symbol. I know this is a very out there theory, but he's a symbol for Israel, okay? Israel was crucified, right? Like, this idea that what the Romans did. Now, I'm not even believing that. I'm just saying, like, not all mythicists, not all, you know, there's some people who think that he's a symbol, but Jews really did get crucified. So here you have real people, historical people, and you have the idea of the mythos being the symbol of all Israel. And they were slaughtered in many respects in 70 AD. So I don't know. You know, there's things to consider and think about. But
well, think of what
isn't Israel itself a symbol, though?
No.
Well, the rebel idea of the Messiah is that he's going to be the earthly king who's going to come kick the Romans' butts, right? That was the whole cause of the Jewish war, according to all the historians, Jewish or pagan, these messianic prophecies. Well, if the messianic prophecy and these rebel leaders the Josephus described sure look like messianic claimants, right? So imagine you're a Jew. You expect your Messiah to be a successful earthly king. Instead, the Romans kick your butt and crucify, as Derek points out, specifically, they crucify your leaders and crucify you in the thousands. And then suddenly the Messiah is not a king. He's the dude who was crucified, the claimant Messiah who was killed. Boy, how do we? It's obviously, in part, in my view, an attempted theological explanation of the defeat in the Jewish war. I think it's hard to avoid that. How does your king become a defeated, crucified dude? Well,
it was kind of already there in their theology, though, wasn't it?
I'm sorry?
It was already there in the theology from the Babylonian occupation earlier. I mean, that concept of...
Well, you do have the idea that punishment will come along, right? So wait a minute here. Here we were, the Zealots were Torah Orthodox. See, the reason that Jeremiah gives for the fall of Jerusalem is they were wayward, as starting way back with Solomon and his foreign wives, and boy, in the northern kingdom Israel, that Jezebel and Ahab. And so what it was is a corruption of their Torah orthodoxy. What's paradoxical about Christianity is that we obviously have these intense Torah orthodox rebels, and they're the ones getting punished. So now we even are reconsidering, wait, do we get the covenant right? And that kind of helps explain Paul. Look, Jesus' death, we didn't look, the Messiah came, we misunderstood him. We, the Jews, killed him, in effect. Paul's being vague on the powers that killed, but he's consistent with what the Gospels say. We, the Jews, are responsible for killing our Messiah. We misunderstood the whole concept, and that's why we got punished. And all Christian writers who consider the Jewish war, I mean from the start, look at it that way. From origin,
they probably say you rather than we. They tend not to include.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But all your earliest Christian writers, Origen, Eusebius, Clement of Alexandria, anyone who mentions it says, yeah, the Gospels. The theme of the Gospels is the Jews were punished for killing Jesus.
Yeah, and I think those ideas do come from Paul, because in 1 Thessalonians he does blame the Jews at one point for killing Jesus. Now, obviously, I don't believe the Jews killed Jesus, but he redirects the blame on them.
His blood be on us.
If you're a monotheist, it's got to be that way, right? If you're a monotheist, and see, it's God's not rewarding the Babylonians when Jerusalem is sacked. He's punishing us for not living up to the covenant, because we're worshiping the one true God. And if we're right about God, then God isn't rewarding Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. He's punishing us. And similarly, when the Jewish war happens and the Jewish rebels who are Torah Orthodox get defeated, they need to come up with some kind of theological explanation, which explains why the one true God would allow them, the believers in the one true God, to get their asses kicked.
This,
I'm hearing now.
This, by the way, isn't anything that didn't survive. There are Orthodox Jews till this day who say that Hitler came to be because Jews in Europe were intermixing and mingling with Gentiles. It's something that persists to this day.
Yeah, that's kind of ridiculous, but
I mean, it's the same mentality, just along to the 21st
I think we all
century,
would agree that's probably not the case, but
homosexuality is punished by God with AIDS, right? And American decadence was punished by 9/11, right? And all these other monsters who ascribe these things to our sin, and God is rightfully punished.
The point is, the guy who screws us over can't be in the right because we have God on our side. If he screws us over, it's because God is punishing us for something, us, the chosen people.
Boy, and the Holocaust needs Jewish explanation too, right?
That's the explanation by some ultra-Orthodox people to the Holocaust. So what you're saying has persisted till this day over 2,000 years. So yeah,
wow,
very much.
Jewish guilt is almost a cliche. That is to say, guilt is almost built into the religion for theological reasons.
Yep. Yeah,
I'm immune to it. I'm immune to it by now. So,
if I may, Mr. Keeps on Ticking has an interesting question. Thank you for that super chat. How do you explain this generation will not pass away or not taste death, second coming into the world prophecy? And if I can ask this question, I know, James, you've got a response. I'd love to respond. I want to let Caleb get an opportunity to start off because he had an interesting question he gave me when I went and interviewed Delcy Allison Jr. about the second coming. So, I'd be interested in having a Christian's take, just especially someone like you who's not like your typical Christian out there with views. Tell us how do you take this, my friend?
So I have not had a full-fledged development of my eschatology yet. So I think everything that we determine is just tentative with this. But with that being said, I would be inclined to think that sorry, I'm hearing an echo on someone else's thing. So
Leverin. I got you. I already muted him. You're good.
Oh, gotcha. No, you're good. But from the people I've talked to and seen, a lot of Christians try to take all of the discourse and try to separate it into two parts. They say, well, at this particular verse, Jesus is talking about the temple being destroyed, and that's what this generation is referring to. And then at this particular verse, he's talking about a future second coming, right? And so they try to do this split. I've also seen people, this is a bit more uncommon, but there are some people who say, well, Jesus talked about these in two different parts, and the disciples may have, in legitimate error, but not intentionally deceitfully, compiled this into one sermon categorically, not realizing they're different. So there's all kinds of ways people do it. Whether or not you think they're ad hoc is a judgment. But I think because of that, doomsday prophecies, even nowadays, and just prophecy in general, I think is a very touchy subject. And I don't think there's any good metric we can use to measure it. So I personally don't really have a very defined view of what Jesus meant by that. And I think that the earliest Christians, at least a lot of them, seemingly did think that he meant, or at least they took it to mean that he was going to come in their lifetime. I think Paul probably thought that. So that's kind of the first things I would say.
Hey, just to plug his YouTube channel, go and look it up. It's PORA. What does the acronym stand for, my friend?
Proselytize or apostatize.
Proselytize or apostatize. Look, man, I'm advertising a Christian YouTube channel right now on MythVision.
For those of you who, hour, right?
I know.
Heresy hangout, yeah. Too.
I don't think people know me enough. I think our Christians should pay attention and understand. I absolutely love you, dude. I mean that. I'm not just saying that. Like I told you this last night in the chat. I love you. I don't care where you end up ontologically. You seem to have a very balanced, loving, forgiving, good person type mentality. You're not out here slapping people with they're going to hell and bashing and all that kind of stuff. So I really do appreciate you, man. And go subscribe to his channel. I hope you get a channel that is just yours at some point, Caleb. We got to make that happen at some point. I know that you co-host and do all of that, but you need to have your own. I'm just plugging you, man. So
thanks. I appreciate it.
It's a good channel.
Derek, you told me that you loved me. So I don't know what the hell's going on here.
I'm definitely polygamous, polyamorous host here at this
two-timing SOB. He said he loved me too.
The Bible doesn't
my heart is broken.
Listen, I've learned to overcome. See, I learned the lesson from Abraham, right? He had a favorite. Jacob had a favorite. I said, screw that, man. I'm going to make all of you my favorite. And it's been working out for me perfectly fine. So
you've got all your exes in one channel. So it's a terrible idea.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Mr. Keeps on Ticking. I'm going to ask this also of you, James. What do you think's going on here? Because this plays into the vein of your work.
Well, it's clear that, for example, Mark 13's text has to be taken as the whole that it is. It was used, even in this particular, by Matthew and Luke pretty straight. And although even they try to step back in other ways, nonetheless, the text as we're given of Mark 13 is, as it stands, the text, the unified text. And in just the plain language of that text, Jesus is saying that there's going to be a glorious coming of the Son of Man within the lifetime of his listeners. Full stop. Full stop. Jesus has to be regarded as the first of those nuts with the sandwich boards, the end is near, who got it wrong. The timing of the second coming. Jesus got the timing of the second coming all wrong, according to the Synoptic Gospels. And that is simply on the face of it in the language. There's going to be the destruction of the Jerusalem and the temple are given in such detail. In fact, the details that Josephus gives us so perfectly that most scholars believe that Mark 13 had to have been composed after 70 AD. I have to agree with them. 70 is the absolute earliest for a composition of Mark 13 because we're given just the details that are too perfect. Not one stone left on another. How would you know that? Or
well, there you go, denying the supernatural, James.
Okay, if you're willing to buy the supernatural, which I am not, the armies in the clouds seen fighting by Josephus perfectly matches the Daniel connection in Mark 13. So what Mark 13 is talking about is the fall of Jerusalem in light of the post-understanding, the post-Jew war understanding of Jews. That's plain. And I have a general rule. A prophecy has been fully fulfilled before the prophet writes it down.
I agree.
It's not going to take the risk.
I think it's a double meaning that though. It's not literally one thing or the other because Mark is the most.
Only one way to make a confident prophecy like that. It's already taken place. And so as with Jeremiah and Isaiah, just as with our Hebrew prophets, they are retrospective.
In terms of the temple destruction.
Make an exception now for Jesus. No, in order to apply the same rule, that prophecies, these mystical prophecies, are retrospective, it must be a proof text for the Flavian claim.
Well, so usually in Mark, there's double meanings. They're talking to the audience reading it, and there's also Jesus talking to the people in front of him. But don't forget the Pauline apocalyptic theology as well.
This is
Jesus
true. Right. Okay. But he said that about his parables, and this is not a parable.
It reads as though he is speaking to his disciples when he says, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of God come, and the Son of Man come in God's in glory and power. But he's speaking through the monitor to people at BW3s during Monday Night Football. So this is not something that necessarily came and went to pass. He's speaking to people in the modern day.
So
at B-dubs.
That's it.
The context is that Mark is meant to be read to an audience. So that's
why do we believe that a historical Jesus made this prediction, or at least this part of the prediction, which I find the least likely possibility, or we believe that the event has taken place fully, all of it, the temple, Jerusalem, and this glory, which is paradoxical. Jesus in Mark 13 warned us of false messiahs. Beware of these rebel leaders, even. So
I think that
if it's not the rebel leaders, then who the heck is it?
Either way you slice this, though, James, whatever your interpretation is in particular on this,
yeah,
stretching this onward is ridiculous. So I think no matter what chopping up you want to do of this, stretching that particular claim on into the future, into present day, is really silly. For me, I'm tempted between both views of this happened and what it meant is one of those things we have to decipher, or all of these things that he lists that did happen, he's saying will happen, really as if it's in the 30s, but really it already happened. And this was assigned to the author of Mark, let's say, if I'm going out on a limb here to say, Mark saw these things and said, this means any moment now, the Son of Man's going to come. There's one or two ways to look at it, and that's your way.
Or it's normally interpreted, that they had such confidence in this prophecy that they thought it was really actually going to happen and preserved it. I think we can say with confidence no second century Christian would have made such a mistake or composed it, which definitely puts Mark 13 in the last third of the first century, in my view, conclusively. No second century Christian would have put that mistake, because they knew that they'd already dissociated it from any Flavian claim, and they knew that glorious coming of the Son of Man in a spiritually eschatological sense had not yet occurred. And so therefore they would not have written any such thing. But I find that that is actually the third alternative, what you gave there, Derek, taking my breath away from me. I still find that less credible than the confidence that's expressed there in saying it's going to happen. And I think prophecy, my general rule about prophecies is that they have fully taken place before they've written down.
Thank you.
It would be unique in the history of prophecies if it were not that way.
And Mr. Keeps on Ticking had another question. Thanks for that super chat. What are the implications of Acts? So
in regards to what?
You can answer that one, Derek, can't you?
I mean, I guess depends on what you're asking, right? Implication of Acts.
So we were discussing this earlier when we were talking about the separation between the Petrine / Jamesian sects.
I think it's a harmonization. Sure. I also think it was written later than what Bart Ehrman said the other day when I listened to a lecture of his. He said 85. I think it was written after Josephus's works of 93 based on the Steve Mason interview I did, which was absolutely gold. I mean, and this goes right into what James is saying, which is interesting. Like, would Luke, it's a question mark. We don't know for sure. I mean, is it possible that they knew of earlier tradition that came from Jesus, or potentially they tied to Jesus and said, hey, we can't let this go? Like, imagine if, and I'm just hypothesizing here, and I'd love to get Caleb's insight too as a Christian to get my thoughts. Imagine what happened in 9/11. There was a little boy who drew, before 9/11 happened, this little boy drew the Twin Towers getting hit by airplanes. No joke. Once 9/11 happened, they brought him on the news, and everyone thought, what's he got, clairvoyance? Is he talking to the dead? Is he a prophet? Is he... No, I'm not even kidding. Humans went all crazy. He ended up on like Fox News and MSNBC and the whole nine. And everyone was freaking out going, how did this kid know? Well, he didn't necessarily know. This is a kid drawing, probably living in New York, sees these tall buildings, knows planes are in the sky where buildings are. It's logic, right? You can rationally come to this conclusion, or you could try and use a supernatural explanation or whatever. But if Jesus is looking around, assuming there is a guy, whether you think there is or isn't, Christians, early Christians, looking around going, whoa, I suspect there's a guy. And they see Rome, and they know that these rebels continuously are causing problems. Rome's going to have it up to here with them. And the Essenes are anti-temple. So here you have this combination of things going on, or at least anti-temple leadership. They're not fans of the priesthood. They're not fans of the people that Rome put into place, okay? And here they are going, this thing needs to go down. If there was a guy named Jesus who said anything like that, and then he dies, and for whatever reason the sparks go, Christianity begins, they're probably remembering that, and that's a sacred moment to say, this guy said that temple would come down. I'm telling you, he's the man. I see that as a possible catalyst.
I just have to chime in here. There's no doubt that our DSS sectarians are anti-temple. But you will notice that even when the rebels take control of the temple and kick out the establishment priests, they don't destroy it. They fight over it, the different rebel factions. Right. So, and there's nothing in the DSS that says, destroy the place, it's so corrupt. It just says, we need to go out to the wilderness to have our own pure... They dream of a day, I think, where they will take over, just like the Maccabees did, kick out the defiling elements and purify the temple. That would have, in reality, that's what they did as rebels, and I think that's what they would have preferred. And I think our prediction of temple destruction is more likely to go to someone like Jesus ben Ananus, who was saying, woe to Jerusalem. Well, that's maybe the historical source of Jesus and Mark 13, more likely, it seems to me. And finally, on 9/11, there have been dozens of Manhattan skyscrapers that have been hit by airplanes. There was a documentary made in the 1990s on the airplane that hit the Empire State Building back in the 30s. So the poor kid could have been inspired by the many times in history when airplanes have hit Manhattan skyscrapers.
Sorry. Yeah, Derek, can I make a comment on that as well? Because I think you said a lot of good things there. Well, I actually would agree with the Jesus ben Ananias analogy. I think that Jesus ben Ananias did predict the temple falling several years before it happened. Now, that was at a time when Rome and Jerusalem were obviously at odds and quite heated towards each other. But I think even a better analogy between the 9/11 one would be you could look at I forget. It's a book about the ship Titan, which was a cruise liner that went down in the North Atlantic, and people drowned and froze to death because they didn't have enough lifeboats. And that was written decades before the Titanic actually hit the iceberg and sunk. And so you have the name similarities, the locations, all that. So yeah, it is possible historically just to get stuff like that by coincidence, especially that. And I think with the temple specifically, we already have Jews who are reinterpreting prophecies in Daniel 9 that talk about the temple being destroyed, the great sanctuary. So I don't see it as implausible at all that Jesus was taking that particular passage and perhaps reinterpreting it. And I also thought the point of that, what he said about Josephus and the soldiers in the sky was also really interesting, because that reminds me a little bit, I believe it's in 2 Thessalonians, when Paul is talking about the Perusia, and he will have his army of angels come and with the trumpet sound and all that stuff. So I think it's actually quite interesting that you see a lot of that Christian eschatology paralleled by a secular source like Josephus, and Tacitus mentions this as well. But I think that just adds more data to assess. So those are just kind of my initial thoughts towards that.
Just one more thing on the actual implications of Acts in the question. The context of the New Testament is mostly polemical, like almost everything in that is a polemic. So if someone is writing something to harmonize the Petrine and Pauline sects, that suggests that there was some vicious fighting going on, serious enough to warrant an entire text to combat it. So, yeah, sorry, that's just my addiction.
Acts is an amazing book, actually. I really enjoy that book, especially after getting a hold of Pervo's commentary. There's so much there to just dive into. So, yeah, thank you. Anyone else on that? Or we're good to the next super chat? Liren?
Hear me?
Yeah, I
can
can
actually
hear you.
have one thing to ask. Have the Romans ever burned down a temple when they won a war, or just burned down the temple as a military objective?
Yes, they burned temples, several temples. They tried to preserve temples when they could. You'll notice they did not burn, for example, major temples in Alexandria and Athens.
Yeah, that's right.
But they were known for burning temples. They had done so more than once. And more than that, I would point out that the Romans during civil wars burned their own temples.
Yeah.
69 AD, during the Civil War, the year of 4 emperors, when the battle was going on for which dynasty would take over after the Julians, the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus was burnt to the ground with Vespasian's brother in it. So
I did not know that.
Yes, the Romans burnt temples, even their own sometimes in civil wars.
Their own, but that doesn't count. That's their own. I'm talking about.
So it wasn't as a set military policy, was it? It was down to the
if
commanders.
they had a policy, it was to try to prevent it.
Yeah.
But Titus, of course, I think understood that it was such a powerful focus for the rebels. In fact, the rebels were never going to destroy it. Titus, the Romans really had to. And Josephus gives us a big, forgive me, bullshit sort of roundabout explanation for how Titus loved the glorious building and how he so regretted it. Very much like Jesus when he cries about the upcoming destruction. Titus thinks it's a beautiful building. Jesus says, "Look at this magnificent building." Titus almost has a parallel moment in Josephus where he so regrets having to destroy this wondrous, beautiful building we all love. But of course, I think the Romans realized it was going to be a focus of Jewish propaganda and wanted it burnt to the ground. It was a Roman.
Now, the reason for doing that is if the rebels themselves are citing, the temple, the religion, as their reason for fighting you. So,
very interestingly, Jesus is the replacement for the temple. Y'all don't need no temple anymore. Y'all don't need any animal sacrifices anymore. Some profound is going on here by the time we get to the Gospels. Someone is telling the Jews, y'all don't need that at all. And in fact, the temple has to kind of be cleared away for Jesus's replacement to take place. Jesus says, destroy this place, right? And I will build another in 3 days. The Romans have to do what they did. The Romans are an agent, you see, of Jesus's whole plan. The temple has to be cleared away so that I can replace it as your temple. So, golf clap for the Romans. Isn't Jesus' apocalyptic prophecy issuing a dire warning against rebellion? Y'all are going to lose. Your beautiful temple is going to be destroyed. If you listen to those false rebel messiahs, that's exactly what Jesus is saying.
Hey, listen, Jacob's not around, so we could talk crap about him for a few more seconds.
Yeah. Straight hate you, Jacob.
Jacob, where you at, boy?
You.
You got 12 sons somewhere around there, boy. Another super chat by Germania, thank you so much for the super chat. And this is a question I definitely look forward to getting Caleb's response as a Christian, because we all on the panel, I think, would have a saying, of course, here. But why did Jesus say to love your enemies, pray for those who hurt you, when he plans to cast his enemies into a lake of fire to eternally suffer? So there's seemingly a Trinitarian concept here. Number one, that he is deity and he is the one in control of casting people into everlasting fire. But our friend, Caleb, we're going to go ahead and put you on the spot. No pressure. No pressure. If you get this wrong, I'm just kidding.
I'll be thrown to like a fire. Got it. No, yeah. Your disappointment would be equally as bad as eternal hellfire, I'm sure. Yeah, so putting aside the Trinitarian aspects of whether Jesus is saying he's going to do this or that God is going to do this, perhaps. I mean, this also just depends on one's exegetical debate of hell. And of course, the early church debated this for a while. Some of the earliest couple texts we have post the New Testament, you kind of see different interpretations. So you saw some people who are annihilationists who thought God would just eliminate people. Some of them were eternal conscious torment, which is what the comment's referring to. And you had people like Origen and Gregory of Nyssa and some others who were universalists who thought that hellfire was meant to redeem and to restore creation. And you can see aspects of this in like Colossians 1, where he talks about the whole of creation will be redeemed, because in Romans 5 and Romans 8, it's talking about it being in bondage. So there's different interpretations. So I'm not going to go into a whole exegetical debate as to what exactly is meant by hellfire. But really, it depends on who you ask is kind of the long question. I know that people who defend ECT will say, well, God himself isn't really doing this. He's doing this because people choose this or something. That's typically how they'll phrase that. And that's not my view. But I guess I think the kindness is that because we love our enemies, we're supposed to go and evangelize, right? And that's the whole motive to do this. And so we are trying to prevent something like that. So that's, I think, typically how that could be ascertained.
Yeah, so you fall in the universalist camp. I just kind of wanted that because as someone in a form of it. So tell us briefly.
Right, but that doesn't mean that that does not mean that I don't believe that there's a hell or hellfire. It only means that the end goal of it is different. So in that view, hell is more of like a purgatorial state where people are redeemed, and it's kind of like what I think it's 1 Corinthians 3. Paul talks about, he who builds his foundation on Christ, if he builds his foundation on something else, he will suffer great loss, but he will still be saved. That the fire purifies us. Jesus talks about in Mark 9, you'll be salted with fire, and that is a good thing. So it's the idea that hell is meant to redeem us and to make us better people, just as the sufferings on earth are meant to make us better. One is just post-mortem and one is in the current life. But
so it's like a spiritual boot camp?
You could say that. I don't know if it's because some people debate as to the nature of this, whether this is literal punishment or this is like an isolated psychosis state. I think Tim Keller described it, and he's not a universalist, but I thought his description was interesting of hell is getting everything you ever wanted and realizing how empty you feel inside. Almost like the prodigal son might be a better example, where he lets his son go out and do whatever he wants, and the son realizes how miserable he is and how much it sucks when he got what he thought he wanted, and what he really wanted deep down was to be with his father again, something that he had originally. So it's kind of that view, right? To say that, and it also goes off of Philippians 2 of
just like that.
What was that?
There's a great Twilight Zone episode, the old TV series from American TV series. Yeah. In that episode, the guy thinks he's dead and gone to heaven because he's getting everything. He's got beautiful women, all the money he wants. He wins every game he plays, and then at the end, the guy who he thinks is like his guardian angel in heaven turns out to be Satan. And the guy says, "Well, wait a minute, I don't like all this. I want some challenge. I want something different. I don't want all this that I want." He says, "But this isn't heaven." And the guy just in the end tells him that this isn't heaven. This is the other place. Precisely because you're getting everything you want.
That's kind of what I was focusing on the hell concept. But what about the actual the rest of the saying?
Where it mentions the fires of hell and suffering and agony and gnashing of teeth in the New Testament, that's actually a mistranslation. It's supposed to just say that it's lukewarm. It's actually very soothing.
You're silly.
You get
well, he's getting. I mean, some of that language is also
fire. It's sort of.
Yeah. Well, some of that language is borrowed from Isaiah as well, because Isaiah says the worm will not die. Weeping, gnashing teeth. So a lot of that's being borrowed from other texts, which talk about suffering and God getting rid of His enemies. But I think you have to look at it cumulatively. So I mean, you could say I don't know if people think Paul thought differently than Jesus did as far as the nature of hell. But of course, you have passages like Philippians 2, where every knee shall bow and confess, and all this stuff. So I think if one wants to take the New Testament as a whole, which, you know, some people, if they think there are schisms, might not be willing to do, I think there are coalescings you can find in there, and there's a cumulative story you can find based on the nature of God as described in the New Testament.
Would you agree, Caleb, that John 3:16 et sec does suggest that people who don't believe are in some way profoundly condemned?
Well, he says, yeah, whoever accepts it will not perish but have eternal life, right?
And then afterwards he says, if you don't believe, you are already condemned.
Correct,
and so
yes.
In some sense, you are condemned to future punishment, and told repeatedly that Jesus, or some glorious eschatological event at least, will come and judge the living and the dead. Right. And so there is some final judgment coming, and it appears from the text, and most famously John 3:16 et sec, that those who don't believe are in some sense doomed to condemnation at that judgment.
Yeah, I don't think the universalists would deny any of that. They don't deny that there's a judgment, that those who accepted Christ in this life will be saved and those who will not will be punished in hell. The only difference is there something that comes after that judgment? And that's kind of where the debate is. So,
what do you think of the other part, though, the love your enemies part? Because we focus quite a lot on hell as a concept. But the quote in Matthew was love your enemies, which he seems to be getting from the Psalms. Do you think that's good advice? I remember Hitchens saying, I don't love my enemies, I want to destroy them. So
yeah.
Nice contrast between Hitchens and Jesus.
You know, the Torah says to love strangers and do good to, you know, guests and stuff. But even that's not do good to love your enemies. It doesn't go that far as turn the other cheek, literally.
James, no, it says love your peers. That's love other people is wrong. It says re'echa. Re'echa, the best translation for it is peers, or people in the same circles as you do. You know, it's people who are close to each other.
Same as do not kill the commandment. Yeah.
So it's a very radical thing. It goes far beyond Hillel, the first century BC rabbi, who said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." This is still more. I mean, this is a very radical innovation that appears to be distinct to Jesus, though. This love your enemies.
Do you think he got that from Confucius, though? Because the Golden Rule goes 500 years earlier, doesn't it?
Why not?
How much overlap do you think there was between?
I think many possible sources. Love
you
your
got Egypt as well, to be fair. Yeah.
Hey, I do want to say, Dale Allison Jr., when I asked him this, he said he hadn't looked into it. He doesn't know if he'll be able to do it in this lifetime or in the next. But he said he's not closed off, and this is Dale talking. He's not closed off to Buddhism through the trade routes, finding its influence into the Hellenized world, and that there may potentially be that influence. Now that's coming from him, right? So I don't know, and I'm a skeptic. Like, I would love to say, yeah, that comes from.
In the first century of the Common Era, there were Indian Hindus practicing in Rome. Full stop.
Yeah.
Were there any in Jerusalem, though? I think that's the more relevant question.
I don't know about that.
I just don't know if they would have been happy about that.
But Jerusalem is a trade hub
at this time.
Yeah. No, Jerusalem isn't a trade hub. That's wrong. If you look at the geography, you'd have to go out of your way to get to Jerusalem, because it's up in the mountains. It doesn't cross any of the valleys you get from Arabia. You're going to have to make a beeline through the Negev desert and to Beersheba, and then to the coastal cities of Asdod, Askelon, and then Yafo, and maybe Haifa. So it's not a trade hub in the slightest.
It's to do with the diaspora Jews, though, living all over the place, going back to there because of the temple rituals. So.
Yeah,
well, that's not really a trade hub. That's more of a tourist destination. That's a tourist destination, if anything. But calling it a trade hub is not.
But when we're talking about the external influences coming in, that's more what we're talking about, rather than the actual trade itself.
Let me get this next super chat, gentlemen. Margaret, thank you for the super chat. Why would we assume a religion must have a real person behind it? I think a religion can be built around a fictional person just as easily, and maybe more easily, than a real person.
I think that's a mischaracterization of mythicism, because that's something that's made an argument constantly, where people go, Jesus must have existed because someone had to start it. Nobody's saying that religions just appear out of nowhere. There's always someone that starts it. The question is whether the deity was real or not.
Well, you can have religions that have, I mean, you know, I don't think there was a single founder of the Greek religions or anything like that. So I wouldn't necessarily be dedicating there has to be a single founder. I just don't think in the case of Christianity, there's any good reason to think that there wasn't a single founder.
And we were just talking earlier about concepts being derivative. Everything is a mutation of a previous idea, and it goes on like that forever.
I don't believe that.
Romans themselves began as ancestor worshippers, and many historians, scholars of the history of ancient Latin religion have pointed out that Jupiter, Jove, Juno may have been actual historical figures in the prehistory of Roman civilization, because they were in effect the ancestors that the whole city worshipped, like Romulus. And did those figures figure into later deities? Yes. And so you say to yourself, was this derivative deity from that deity a historical figure? Well, the answer could be very subtle and complex. It could be so far back, so thinly based on a historical figure that, you know, maybe there was some historical guy named Jupiter, you know, 800 years BC in Rome. I don't know.
Probably not, because
Jesus, what's curious is that we have a first century story placed with first century context. And I think the great challenge for the mythicist is the larger circumstantial argument. Jesus may have been the opposite of the guy in the Gospels. We know, everyone knows, this is not controversial. Everyone knows the Gospel, a sane person now knows, the Gospels contain big mythologized elements. So the real...
Caleb agrees with that, by the way, just so everybody knows.
Right. Every critical scholar, even Christian critical scholars, realize there's mythologizing going on. So I'm going to be brutally honest here. I do not regard the question of historicism or mythicism to be terribly significant.
In the sense that it doesn't really matter anymore.
It really doesn't.
It's a purely academic question.
Jesus of the New Testament who had influence on history.
There's nothing hanging on the outcome either way.
Or not. And that's the study that interests me. What are the theological and, in my case, also political agendas behind this stuff? That's what we can know. Yeah. What we can infer is, for example, Mark is a response to Paul. Matthew is a response to Mark. Luke is a response to Matthew and Mark, etc. What we can see is a sort of the theological agendas, the political agendas of the authors. That's what we can confidently infer, in my view. Maybe not much more.
Derek, your face is saying something I'm interested in knowing. You showed up and I said, look,
he's just looking at pictures of his wife.
But this question, right, is asking kind of the mythicist angle. And you were recently in Varieties of Mythicist, Mythicism, if you will, the book, as a historicist. So the question is, you know, where do you stand on this? Like, what's your take?
Well, you know, what's interesting is that I used to argue for mythicism, and nowadays I lean toward historicity. I actually did have something of a Facebook debate or discussion with someone in the MythVision podcast, and they made the point that, you know, if you had various dying and rising gods or savior figures and whatnot, isn't it simpler to just say via Occam's razor that that's all Christianity was? Just apply Occam's razor. That's the simpler, most straightforward explanation. And the problem is, as I see it, human history and the kind of convoluted and dynamic nature of human interaction and historical matters, it's not so simple as to just apply Occam's razor and say that the simplest explanation is necessarily the best. It's not the best explanation if it's oversimplified. And
doesn't Occam's razor, though? Occam's razor is supposed to apply to the big picture. It's supposed to apply once you've collated all your evidence, not just from your initial reaction. Is that right?
Right, but in the context in which this guy was arguing it, that's what he meant. And, you know, the problem is that you have to take into account these key pieces of historical data of evidence for there probably having been a historical Jesus, just as James was talking about earlier. And when you take those things into account, you realize, okay, based on the data, it makes a lot more sense that we did have some kind of historical founder who was very likely crucified under Pontius Pilate. And that was sort of the catalyst for this movement. Would you say that that's about right as far as you understand it, James?
James, we can't hear you.
You're muted, James. You muted yourself.
You cut out.
Oh, pardon. Please forgive me.
The only time in James' life that he made himself be quiet. No kidding.
No, we on purpose take no position on the historicity, mythicism question in creating Christ. We believe Roman providence can be established independently of that, and the answer to that question really doesn't have much bearing on Roman providence theory. So, and so I admit our title, "Creating Christ," may be a little misleading, but it wasn't creating Jesus; it was creating Christ. Right?
So we all, like all of us, except maybe. Well, I don't know. I don't know what.
In any event, these days, I have to say I'm with Mr. Bennett. I am leaning history. In the conversations I've had with various people now, including Jacob, who's with us today, I think they're nudging me into taking a position of composite historicism, and I think I believe that they're more likely than not, and I won't break it down in Bayesian terms like Carrier, but more likely than not, there was a historical figure who was crucified by Pilate. But I also believe there were other figures in history whose statements and stories made it into the life of Jesus. So I'm a semi-historicist who's a composite historicist, if that makes sense.
Fun fact, Dan Barker leans mythicist yesterday on my show, which was interesting. So, Joel, you have another friend whose side's leaning in that direction. And, yeah, he was awesome. It was fun yesterday.
That makes two of us. There are dozens of us. Dozens.
I used to be. And look, it's not like I'm dogmatic.
Nor am I on this question.
Yeah, like this is not a... Yeah, Bart Ehrman is definitely dogmatic about this one, in my opinion. But
I think it hinges on how we take certain references in Paul. I think it hinges on certain broader circumstantial arguments, and it may, to some extent, and although I think it's not, as I said earlier, I don't think Josephus is decisive. It may depend on how we understand the reference to James being the brother of this Jesus guy, because that's in Galatians 2 and in the early Christian writings. So when we include that, I think that's our primary evidence that we need to focus on when it's the historicism. But, you know, I'm not dogmatic by any means.
But James, don't you always say that circumstantial evidence make a case with your experience as, a law guy? I mean,
as a prosecutor, they'd always say, oh, well, this is just a circumstantial case.
Yeah.
What we mean by a direct case is eyewitness testimony, right? I saw Joe commit the murder. Yeah. All right. But that guy, the defense attorney, stands up and says, well, were you wearing your glasses that day? Had you been drinking that day? And then I'm going to call an expert on how human memory fades and perception. Do you have biases? Weren't you an enemy of my client? Wouldn't you be likely to see? Human witnesses have misperceive. They hallucinate. They have biases. Their memory fades over time, etc. But DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, that's circumstantial evidence. And it's really the most powerful kind of evidence we have. So one should not dismiss circumstantial evidence because it is often far more powerful than eyewitness testimony. If, for example, someone says, some church father reports of another church father, this guy studied from John. Well, I'm much more likely to disbelieve that than I am to believe some physical piece of evidence from archaeology or numismology, or some broader reference to a main historical figure in Josephus, like Vespasian himself. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So you're telling me if I commit a crime, I can leave as many direct evidence.
He's just saying you better hire him.
Kind of circumstantial evidence can be more convincing than an eyewitness testimony.
Okay,
thank you. Mr. Monster, thank you for the super chat, my friend. I appreciate the super chat. If we never found Tutankhamun, hope I'm saying that right. Would we still assume a lot of stuff in Egyptian history to be myth? Maybe more mysteries are out there?
No.
Well, we had inscriptions, prehistoric inscriptions that referred to Akhenaten and other members of his family. We knew about King Tut and his mother before. In fact, that's what led them to, you know, discover Tut's tomb in the 20s. So, and to recognize it as such. But yes, of course, physical evidence is the goal. And I mean,
was Tutankhamun individually, is this supposed to be representative of more, or just that specific find? Because there's a wealth of archaeological evidence of history in Egypt. So I don't know why Tutankhamun specifically. Maybe it's just because it's the most famous example.
Love those Egyptians. They left inscriptions on everything. A lot of inscriptions. So bless them for making all those darn inscriptions. They really helped the historian.
Blessed are the inscription makers.
Blessed are the inscription makers.
That would be in an inscription, yeah.
Oh, today's Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate that, my friend. Mr. Monster is asked this question. I just want to say thank you so much. I don't know jack diddly squat about it, so I wouldn't want to pretend to. And then, you know, I don't boast about things I don't have a clue about, and I definitely don't. Thank you, though. Zach Johnson said, did the early Christians view Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit as one? So this is obviously a debate.
There have been entire books written on this one.
Yeah. What do you guys want to?
Modalism.
Well, yeah. That's one view. But then the Trinitarians still kind of use similar oneness language, right? There's three, but one.
Yeah.
And that's always really confusing.
You know,
where do you stand on it, Caleb? You're the Christian. Let's ask you, and then
I'm a Trinitarian. If you want to know that, if you're asking, did I think the earliest Christians believe that? Well, I think that the earliest reference we'd have would be something like Paul in 2 Corinthians, where he says like he's leaving his last salutations in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Now, as far as what was Paul's idea of their relationship, did Paul think they were separate entities or the same? I don't think we really know. I know it's obviously referred to in the Gospels a lot, but again, as far as like the relationship, I don't think we have any really strong data. If you think that the Johannine Common in 1 John is an interpolation, so I don't know if that's a subject for creeds or not, but I think certainly the earliest Christians had some concept of proto-Trinitarian theology, but what exactly that looked like, I'm not sure we can really know historically.
Dr. Price has the best theory about this. He says it's like a Cthulhu type thing, that you see it and it's beyond human comprehension. So you don't say anything about it. It's Cthulhu levels of madness.
Well, what's clear is that we had different kinds of Christians. I mean, the Council of Nicaea was about something, and what it was about were a variety of different conceptions of this matter. Was Jesus adopted? Did he become God? Was he God? Was he the pre-existent being? Was he merely with God at the creation, or was he actually just the means by which God brought creation into being? So, what you've got extreme Gnostics on one side and extreme Arians on the other. That needed to be ironed out.
And of course, you get different answers from different texts. They're trying to read the Bible as if it's just the Bible, but it's not. Each author had their own view.
Who was Jesus praying to in Gethsemane? It's a strange
thing. God the
Father,
right?
See, exactly. If there's not some distinction, and then if there is some distinction, if I can pray to myself, it's a weird kind of thing. But if there's some distinction and we're still saying they're the same thing, was he the agency of creation? Was he there with God at creation as another deity? Was he the first creation of God? And so you begin to have all these different kinds of theories that have developed to try and understand the unity and difference simultaneously.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you all have looked into, like, because historically that's a question, but I personally, just being, you know, the theologian, think it's interesting to see the various like philosophical arguments you see in the modern literature about it. And the most interesting analogy I can think of for the Trinity was by I think it's Leflau was his name, but he kind of argues like via time travel. So if you've seen, this isn't exactly this analogy, but like if you've seen the movie Back to the Future, where he goes, it's like, what if you have your present self, you meet your future self, and you can meet your past self, and let's say that you all are together in one spot. Like, are there three different people, or are these all the same person? And it's not entirely clear. And I guess that might be kind of the closest analogy I can think of to do that, where it's like they're all God, but they're not necessarily separate gods, but they're not also identical because they have distinct attributes. I think identity just as a principle is confusing. It's like if you have interesting fact is that if you actually take certain organisms like a starfish and cut off a piece of them, it'll grow into another organism. So if you take a starfish and cut it directly down the middle, and each half grows into two different ones, which one of them is the original starfish?
Both.
I'm not really sure. That's kind of a tricky question. So when
the ship of Theseus at that point.
Yeah, it's the ship of Theseus. Yeah.
No, so we're starting down a Theseus ship problem, right? The classic problem. Exactly. It's got the same ship, even though every plank of it has been replaced over time. Yeah, so no particular part of it is the same, but is it still the same ship?
And what's really interesting. Yeah, and what's interesting, I know Dale Allison does this too with resurrection. He's saying if the Jews believe that we're resurrected in our actual original bodies, not just a copy of it, not just ex nihilo creation, what happens to those who've been cremated or are severely decomposed, where the cells and the molecules have gone through the air, been breathed in, and been eaten, and gone through all these people? Who gets which parts, right?
Well, this is where the incorruptible bone concept. There was a dogma of an incorruptible bone within the body that couldn't be destroyed, and I think it was quite a brave doctor who disproved it because he risked his life to do that.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, now we know that's not. So you'll have Christian physicalists like Peter Van Inwagen who don't believe in the soul, and it gets very complicated when he tries to talk about identity and resurrection, because I'm not sure. And there's been a lot of technical literature, so I'm not an expert, but there's been a lot of confusion as to what exactly counts. Is this the same person? Is this just a clone? Is this the same body? So it's an interesting, I think identity is an interesting question. I think that's why the Trinity is such a fascinating and also confusing concept.
What's interesting, Paul has no physical resurrection. To him, it seems to be a purely spiritual thing.
I would disagree with that. But
let me put it this way. Paul doesn't make clear that there's any sort of physical resurrection. And one of the things the gospel writers are keen on showing is that there was. So it appears that perhaps Mark is stepping back from Paul, at least to make a physical resurrection explicit.
Well, but I think that that's troubling, because when you look into, and people try to talk about anti-Docetist literature, and Luke and John, it's not even clear, because yes, Jesus is eating and being touched, but he's also vanishing and walking through walls, and it's not. So I think, but I would agree with Allison and John Cook and other people who say that I think Paul and the Gospels actually have a similar view, where this is the same body that is physical, and yet it's also a spiritual body, where it's kind of this trans-physical, I think is how N.T. Wright calls it, idea, where it's almost between heaven and earth, where it's physical and yet not really an apparition, but not completely. It's kind of like on a spectrum, and it's somewhere in the middle.
Paul has
is it the same? He's got pre-created bodies, hasn't he, in Paul's theology?
I think that's also a really strange exegesis by Carrier when he reads it that way. But yeah.
But Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, flesh and blood shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, if we read 2 Corinthians 5, it's clear Paul means some kind of body. We wish to be clothed. We don't want to be found naked. But whatever that is, it's not the corporeal, carnal kind of body we have now. It's something different. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. William Lane Craig tried to spin this and say, well, this is synecdoche. It doesn't literally mean that, but Robert M. Price completely refuted him in an article of his, saying that, yes, it is synecdoche. And
what is synecdoche?
True of the whole must be true of the part. That's the whole point. When he says flesh and blood, he means more than just flesh and blood, but that entails also flesh and blood. Now, this is a complete contradiction with Luke 24, where he's come back and he's flesh and bone. He says flesh and bone rather than flesh and blood, but given the context, he's clearly talking about the same kind of thing.
And if you're open to contradictions, of course, and different ideas floating around, this isn't a problem.
Right.
Like, because you could go, okay, Paul has an idea, later Christians have it, but if you're harmonizing and you're a theologian who thinks that all of this is like teaching continuity doctrine from what we see in the later Gospels, which are clearly physical, and then go back like what Dale does, then you might have a problem taking that kind of position.
It just strikes me that Paul talks about a burial, and that's that. And his new body is pretty much spiritual, and the whole tomb business in the Gospels is sort of going out of its way in a polemic refutation. No, look at the proof we've got. More than that, the empty tomb is a classical trope to prove divinity. among demigods and hero gods, and their tomb was empty, and suddenly they vanished and weren't there. It was like Yoda disappearing in Star Wars or something and being dissolved into the Force. There's this pagan.
It's always at Star Wars.
There's definitely a pagan trope of the empty tomb that way precedes Christianity, and it appears that the gospel writers are actually, because Paul is being so Hellenized in his idea of resurrection, that the gospel writers are taking a more Jewish step back, because, you know, the Jews preserve bones and ossuaries and so forth. If you were a Daniel believer, you probably believed that whatever resurrection there would be a physical resurrection. That's why Egyptians, of course, mummified the dead. There is some physical significance. Why Osiris was physically resurrected, put back together by Isis, not just a spiritual resurrection or apotheosis, say like the Greek gods have. It's interesting, of course, that you have that fusion in Serapis of both of those elements. But in any event, it seems to me that when you're going out of your way to have the tomb stories and the empty tomb and Thomas touching the wounds, you're going out of your way to correct something in Paul, implication that it might have been purely spiritual.
Do you think that
Giza Vermeij said it best in The Resurrection, History and Myth, that Paul is combining his Jewish legacy with that of what appeals to his Hellenistic readers. He's syncretizing these ideas. It's still a body of some sort, but it's not a body of flesh and blood like we have now. So yeah, Paul is making a point of selling this to his Gentile audience, and that's why he is doing this. And in the gospel, as you said later, James, they make a point of concretizing the resurrection and making it more of a tangible physical body.
So Caleb,
go on this.
I'm just going to drop out, guys, and then. But thanks for having me. It was great.
Take care.
Thanks for jumping in. It's late where he's at. I already know.
Right.
He's probably like 2 a.m. now.
It's only 10:30, but I do have work. So
okay.
Thanks,
It
guys.
seemed late. Caleb, did you want to respond to that? And then I just want to make one more comment and then get into some of these other super chats, if you don't mind.
Well, I don't know if I have that much to add other than just saying, I think that there are. I think it's misleading to just overgeneralize to say Paul believed in a spiritual body and the Gospels depict a purely physical body. I don't think either of them depict purely one or the other. I think it's a combination in both instances. Because again, the Gospels don't. Yes, Jesus does eat and touch, but he also is clearly not just as a zombie corporeal like Lazarus or someone else was, but he clearly has a transformed, almost apparition-like body as well, and it's not entirely clear. I think Paul has that similar idea where he talks about the current body we have is transformed. It's not just raised as, we just get our flesh and blood and that's it. This is a glorious body, an immortal body, a body that, while yes, it is the same body, technically speaking, it's getting a makeover, right? It's getting a revamp.
Jesus, in the transformation where he appears with Elijah and
Transfiguration,
Transfiguration. It's clear that he already has this superpower, if you will, even before crucifixion. He can sort of transform and talk, chat with Moses and Elijah, the big Jewish heroes. So he's already, kind of a Superman with superpowers.
Just two notes now that you brought that up. Couple things. There are some scholars who actually think that that's a post-resurrection scene. I don't, and that's just up for debate. Of course,
we see why they would say that, though.
I do.
But are witnessing this before the crucifixion, is what we're told.
Right.
Yeah, and that's. Sorry, go ahead, Derek.
No. Go ahead, Caleb.
No, I said I think the reason for that also is because the resurrection appearances in the Gospels are very contrary to what you'd expect from taking this from the scriptures. When you look at the texts in 2nd Baruch and Daniel and other places that talk about, a glorious, righteous body, which is what Paul basically sees in Acts. And you have a Jesus who's not recognized, who looks kind of just like a human. He's not glorious like he is in the Transfiguration. And it's very strange to think that this is what they thought the future resurrection body would look like. So I think that's why people try to say, oh, well, here, this looks what we'd expect a resurrection appearance to look like, a vision in heaven of a glorious Jesus like you have in in Revelation 1. So I think why part of that view is there. And I think that's also interesting to see why they depicted Jesus in the way they did in the Gospels. So,
and just one more fun fact I thought was interesting. A question from Dr. Price, Dr. Robert M. Price to Dennis McDonald was on, maybe it was to him and Richard Carrier when I was in California, but the idea of the empty tomb. right? Fun fact about the whole like stories in Acts 17. What I thought this was really interesting when Paul is giving his Aristotle speech, so to speak, and he is saying, in your own poets, this is a jab at our Israel only guys that I've been trying to say for a long time. They don't listen to anything I have to say because they're right, and just everybody must bend to that. But anyway, your own poets have said, and he quotes Epimenides. Epimenides is writing 7 centuries BC, but he's talking about Zeus, and he literally in that original context, and we see this in like First Timothy, I think it is as well, where he's talking about a certain group that thought Zeus had been buried in a cave, and like they go to this cave and they're like honoring that this is where Zeus died or something to this effect. He's like, no, Zeus is alive. And Paul's using this rhetoric, or Acts is using this rhetoric in the mouth of Paul, potentially giving some type of nugget maybe of what Paul may have sounded like when he did give preaching or went and proselytized Gentiles. But the idea is there's this cave motif, and it kind of made me wonder, like, am I overstretching? There wasn't a dogmatic answer, and he said, I don't know. But
Josephus goes over to the Romans, right? He goes to the suicide pact, and he's just the lucky one who survives.
Yeah, he's lucky.
One, and he survives. So that's probably a BS story Josephus is giving us. But he's in a cave, he tells us, for 3 days when he's discovered by a woman and emerges to his new resurrected life as a Roman. There have been scholars who pointed out that might be another source.
Yeah.
Josephus himself may be saying, I'm like Jonah, or maybe using those classical motifs of being in a cave. The empty tomb is a classical motif for proving that your demigod has been resurrected or has experienced an apotheosis.
Thank you. Shireen, thank you for the super chat again, my sweetie. I appreciate it. What is the Song of Songs about? As marriage is not mentioned, and how did this develop to pluck out your eyes, weak flesh, etc.?
Well, I know the first part. I don't get the second part.
Hebrew literature is far more pro-sex than Christian literature.
Only that part is.
Well, I know there are rules, Liren, but even so, it's okay. It's far, Paul, there's nothing the equivalent of Paul saying, if you can be a celibate, be a celibate. Paul says, but it's better to marry than to burn. So in effect, Paul is saying marriage is a sex containment policy. We really don't want sex. Jesus is probably doing that more symbolically with his eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Jesus and Paul appear to be advocating celibacy in a way unknown to previous Jewish literature. Stop. By the time the Essenes...
not stop. It was that for women. He just said that you do it for men too.
Well, women can, but men and women can have legal... In other words, marriage is a wonderful thing because of being fruitful and multiplying. The Essenes seem to be the first Jewish group to just renounce sex and violate the first commandment in the Torah, be fruitful and multiply. But there were Jewish sects at the time, at least a group of Essenes, who were celibate. Josephus praises them for being celibate and says, see, it's like these Platonic ascetics. But by the time you get to the 1st century, Judaism is being affected by Greek dualism, as antibody, mind-body dualism, anti-sex, anti-money. And so you notice mystics of both East and West develop antibody asceticism. Hindi yogis and things like that torture their bodies just like medieval monks whipped their backs bloody to prove how anti-body they were, because the body is, of course, leaving the body is the big goal in Christianity, and it's the liberation, even with physical resurrection. So if you have medieval monks for most of Christian history taking vows of celibacy and poverty, it didn't become a requirement of priests until about 1,000 years ago. But there were orders as old as St. Benedict that were, and Christian women by the end of the Roman Empire were refusing to have sex with their husbands. So Roman culture was altered into an anti-sex way by these new dualistic anti-sex doctrines. And I think even Judaism had become more anti-sex by this point, Liren, than the Torah itself would indicate.
Well, it depends, because you got to admit that they have a double standards. Men are supposed to be as promiscuous as they can, and women are supposed to be as least as they can. There's even a line that says of two brothers saying, "God damn, what are we gonna do about our little sister? She's like a door," and she says, and then she comes in and says, "I'm not like a door, I'm like a wall," meaning she doesn't open.
Right.
Yeah,
Nothing comes in or out. That's a very interesting.
I needed you to explain that one to me. Yeah. I'm a little slow, so. By the way, I need to go see my wife for 30 minutes. I'll be right back.
That's a very graphic way of putting it, but in essence,
there are denunciations of promiscuity, especially women's promiscuity in Hebrew literature. But there's also the Song of Solomon.
There's
nothing like that in Christian literature. If there was an item of early Christian literature that said how beautiful this woman's breasts are, or how wonderful it is to be intimate and make love with you, the Christians were anti-sex. So anti-sex, Christian wives were stopping having sex with their husbands in the Roman imperial period. So anti-sex that if you were a Christian clergyman, you were taking or clergywoman, you were taking about, why does Jesus have to be born of a virgin, for example? There's this inherently antibody, anti-sex sort of dualism in Christianity that goes way beyond Judaism. Sorry.
I should also mention that the Song of Songs fits nicely within the context of ancient Near Eastern love poetry. There are several points of commonality with Sumerian myths, that of Ishtar and Tammuz, as well as ancient Egyptian love poetry as well. I've got several examples of that if anyone's interested. But it's a very common piece of ancient Near Eastern love poetry.
My wife loves ancient love poetry, and so she collects. She has a website, themagentahornet.com. She has ancient love poetry from around the world, from prehistoric times, ancient times. She gets up to Sappho and Catullus, because you can't miss them. It's all that stuff's too juicy. Ovid, the Ars Amatoria. But there's no question that sex poetry dies when Christianity takes over the Roman world. Boom, dead. Sex is nothing but evil, to be avoided. Only trouble. We should obey Paul if we can, be totally celibate here on earth. Marriage is a sex containment policy. That's just the reality. And it took till modern time, only recent centuries, and look at the psychological repression of today. Direct result of this Christian, Neoplatonic, anti-body view, anti-earthly view of earthly pleasure and biological reality that is just endemic to Christianity, and is recently, or starting to change recently. They're still mired in it to a large extent. Consider how vicious any doctrine against masturbation. Consider the viciousness of someone saying masturbation's a sin.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with
Actually,
you.
that was in the Hebrew Testament too, so that's not...
That's true. Gays and adulterers, I understand there's a sex code, but there's also a praise of sex. There's also a be fruitful and multiply thing.
And racism was completely normal.
No, if you can get away with it, be celibate.
And racism was completely normal back then too.
Yes. We kind of assumed. They were such shrewd, perceptual tribalists that things like racial distinctions, as irrational as they are, actually made sense to these primitives. But did Christianity add all kinds of guilt and repression that had not existed in other cultures and religions?
James, remember, one of the heroines in the stories is a whore. Rahab,
that's right. Rahab's a whore. We focus on, and what's really interesting is that not in order to say a nice thing about Jesus, but quite the opposite, that he's descendant of sinning women. Notice that the Matthew's genealogy actually points out the sinning women that are involved, or the foreign women that are involved in Jesus's genealogy. Bathsheba is the source of course, God punishes the baby. Neither David nor Bathsheba get the punishment.
It's not the baby. It's the guy. Not. It's the guy. It's the thing in the womb. They didn't view babies as babies. So not really. He punished the woman because the baby is not a baby until he's born, which is how people view it back then.
Oh,
I tell it to people all the time. That
baby. Anyway,
we're getting off track. So
okay, whatever.
I know we've gotten onto natural law theory now for some reason.
Well, I know, and I don't mean to rip on religion like that, but I think it's a clear historic fact that Christianity had a more repressed and puritanical view of sex than pagan religions did, or even the Jewish religion it comes from.
Okay, real quick. I've got a surprise. I got my buddy Neil from Gnostic Informant to pop on. I got to give him a little backdrop real quick here. You guys know I've been friends with Dr. Robert M. Price for like a few years, like actually meeting him in person and all of that. Yeah, and I talked to him about this movie called Zeitgeist that has a lot of things wrong and there's a lot of cool things that are mentioned in there.
This
to make
would be one Caleb might be able to respect too.
Well, here's the deal. I pulled and twisted and said, let's watch this and get you to tell me where things are wrong and maybe where they got things right, things like that. At the end of the day, Neil got him to do it. And Neil, do you have like any advertisement you can give on like finally getting a mythicist Robert M. Price to say, let me correct the record for the Zeitgeist movie and have him watch it with him and go, let's correct something. Or I think that might be right, or that's wrong. I've been wanting to get his take on that for a long time. So,
yeah, I actually watched Zeitgeist with Dr. Robert Price and recorded it. So we have a whole review of the movie, the first part. This is going to be great, guys. This is a good treat for everybody, especially the mythicists, but even Christians, because the Christians have a lot of things that they have against that movie, and they're rightfully so. There's a lot of things wrong about that movie, and I think Dr. Price handled it amazingly. He was picking apart what was wrong, but he was also, telling you what he agreed with on things. It was pretty good. It was 2 hours long, and I'm going to have it out by tomorrow, hopefully, if not the latest, the next day.
Hey!
Did y'all do the whole?
Well done.
Did y'all do the whole movie or just the Christian part?
Yeah,
because I think that also advocates like 9/11 truthism, right?
Right.
Yeah. We're not getting into that.
That kind of, I think that hurts the credibility of the film overall. But
it gets into some things that, I agree. And I might as well do a quick plug. I don't know if we have any mods in the chat, but I'd like to get everybody on the screen and everybody who joined us today, their YouTube channels posted so you guys can go subscribe. There's Neil's channel. I just posted that in the chat so you guys can go subscribe to his channel and pay attention. Tomorrow that video will be released, so it'll be fun to see mythicist Dr. Robert M. Price to pick apart Zeitgeist and say no, and no, and I'll be excited to do that because that was one of the movies. You got to imagine, I'm completely ignorant on any of this stuff. And I finally something in such a way painted Jesus on even playing field as other gods. Like, you're born in a particular tradition. If you're a Hindu, you're going to think Vishnu. You're not going to think Jesus. If you're born in, Muhammad, you're going to think as your prophet. If you're Islam, and, the list goes on and on. You see yours as the height and everyone else is below and low and non-important. It made this even playing field, no matter how accurate or not. And it made me go, oh, my goodness. It kind of made me go, is this true? I don't know, at the time. But it planted that seed of doubt for me to kind of consider looking at this and going, what's going on? So there it is in the chat for those of you who don't know. Subscribe to Neil. Be on the lookout. Also, I forgot to mention this. I think that Jacob had to go. I don't know what the reasoning was exactly, but I know he has a show coming up, for those who don't know, at 7 tonight. He's releasing his premiere.
He's been working very hard on editing the Bart Ehrman interview so it can drop tonight, which he very much wants it to happen. That's probably
Bart Ehrman right there. That's as good as it gets.
Yeah. And he worked really hard in order to raise money he's already
planning on having Bart Ehrman back, as well as some other big name scholars. So good for Neil, Jacob, Derek. You guys are the ones who I depend on. And thank you for having YouTube channels. Thank you for producing this material. It's just an invaluable asset. And I want every listener hearing us right now to go hit like, subscribe, share on each one of your YouTube channels. Jacob's, Derek's, Neil's, you name it. That's these guys are the ones doing the exciting work and Christian scholarship these days. So yes,
just don't miss this video, everybody. Make sure you go in 73 minutes. This premieres. Go support Jacob. Also, Derek, the other Derek, the better Derek, the far better Derek.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Here, I'm going to go. Huh?
About time someone said it.
Well, I mean, look, I told you my mailing address where I expect the check to be sent. I'm totally cool with it. You know what I mean? It's all good. Be sure to go subscribe to Derek's. Derek's dropped quite a bit of videos. One of my favorites is the origins of Yahweh. Oh man, I love that one. Cool. That one was really fun. But you know, go check him out. Look forward to have him back on the channel more often. Now that your internet is actually far better than it was, and it could still use help. I'm not going to lie. But when you're in Kentucky, I'm not sure how much better it can get. You know, I'm not. Is that a jab? It's like,
yeah, we're just down here in our overalls kicking tails around. You know,
wait,
we're trying to do our best, by God.
Derek, where in Kentucky are you from?
Want from me, City Slicker?
Derek, where in Kentucky are you from?
I'm in Paducah. I'm originally from Southern Indiana, but presently I'm in Paducah, Kentucky.
Well, I'm in Louisville, so I thought that was quite interesting. We're in Kentucky. Yeah.
Well, they need to borrow some of your internet, and also Caleb.
Do we flight chicken? That's all I know about Kentucky. Sorry, guys.
Here is Caleb's channel. All of the channels I'm posting, if you don't know who they are, click the link. Go subscribe to him. Here's Caleb's YouTube channel. He's co-hosting here as well. Go show some people some love. And you know, how much more so people you don't ontologically agree with, showing humanity, you know, show love and do all that good stuff. That's what it's all about. Did I already show yours, Neil? I think I did.
Did
I share it? Did I share it? I'm going to share it.
I think you did, but you can do it again just to be safe.
How good that looks.
I know.
Dude, you went all out with the bold font. I do enjoy that. It's
very bold choice.
Yeah, I also like his editing, by the way, because he'll edit like clips like into the interviews, and I think it looks nice. Like,
Thank you,
it's like over.
And I gotta get you on, Caleb. I really been trying to get. I really kept you on my mind the whole time. I do want to have you on soon. So
thank you. I appreciate.
I haven't forgot about you.
Great interview, and you're right. It blends in the audio and visual stuff when he can. It's great.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. If you want to have me on to talk about the resurrection or like miracles and the historical method or something, you know,
definitely that'd be fun. I would love that.
Absolutely.
I'll email you.
I only talk about Star Wars, so don't invite me.
Well, I mean, if it's Star Wars, if it's Carrier's book, Jesus from Outer Space, it could be relevant. I don't know.
The only reason James is on because he has a lightsaber.
That's true. I do.
I got Darth Vader right here, guys.
Oh, that's so cool.
He has it near him.
Oh wow! Look at that.
Oh,
I have more than one.
Oh wow! It even makes the
Darth Valiant.
Darth Valiant.
So I just want you to all beware. The Force is with me.
I'm not messing with that guy.
He is strong in the law because he used to be a lawyer and he won a lot of cases, so he's strong in the law. Or the Force, or what are we doing again?
It really helps with juries just to get out your red lightsaber. The juries, I find your lack of faith disturbing, and they all just on the line.
Okay, so I'm going to do some plugs. Those of you who actually are serious fans and been watching, go get Creating Christ. If you haven't yet, if you're like me and you're driving all the time, get it on Audible. You can listen to it, get it on paperback, check out the theory, look into what he's got going on here. We're trying to set up a debate with him and Dr. Carrier. We're still waiting on the responses here because Carrier admitted, like, he's like, I would need to look at the numismatic evidence. Like, I can't take this lightly. I would need to look into the dolphin and the anchor symbols and do a deep dive. So do read the book. Do a deep dive, and maybe you'll find an anchor and a dolphin.
I appreciate that he thinks he needs to do the research and is willing to do the research. I am deeply flattered just by that, even if he ends up totally disagreeing with me.
And that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see everybody support the people on the channel. Varieties of Jesus Mythicism. Go and get the book. John W. Loftus, Robert M. Price edited. Also, Derek has his own section where he actually is authoring that, and that's going to be on. Is it the Dying and Rising Gods?
Yes.
So go and check that out.
Also, Addictus.
He does have the Addictus book as well. Someone who's got over addiction without God. So
that's me.
Definitely check that out. Hey, also, here is the webinar. So today is the last day. I repeat this. The last day to sign up. Early bird special. Save you $20. I think it's like $20, something like that. To join the webinar. I might even be the host. I'm not exaggerating. So let me put that in the chat again. It's mythvisionpodcast.com/Christmas. And Dr. Ehrman and Chris, his right-hand man, are probably going to have me, I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure, hosting this webinar December the 5th all day long.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Congratulations, Derek. I hope that happens.
Thank you. I'm just happy to be, able to do these things. Go click that that link, mythvisionpodcast.com/Christmas, and you'll see me on December the 5th if you do that. That's that. And then, of course, the Patreon. I always mention this. This really does help me keep doing what I'm doing. I just launched 8 videos with Dennis McDonald and Richard Carrier, all brand new, not on YouTube. And there's hundreds of videos that are not on YouTube that are there. This keeps me alive. It's only $3 a month. It's the lowest tier. You can enter and you'll watch anything and everything I have on there. If you're able to afford more, you're always welcome that, of course. That helps me out. But you can get in for $3 a month. And there's people who charge per video on Patreon and stuff. I have hundreds. You don't have to come out of pocket doing all that. You can watch whatever I have there. That's just a way to keep me doing what I'm doing here at MythVision. So I know that's a little extra long plugging and I want all of your channels to be there. I'm just waiting for this guy right here to have a channel.
Didn't you just get one?
I have a channel.
Where?
You just launched one, didn't you?
Is it in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
I'm about to fit and about to be. Hold on.
It's new though, isn't it?
No, not really. It's been around for... As you can see, I've been very active.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
There we go. The last one is good. I mean, I got back into doing stuff, this week. There was a video, the guy who wrote Creating Christ and the guy who wrote Creating Christ.
Who's that guy? I'm just kidding.
Oops.
No, the other guy.
Well, I ended up posting that down in the chat as well. Go subscribe. The channel's called Not That Type of Nerd. And definitely go check them out, support them. This is what we do. Thank you so much, guys. Is there anything I missed? Any final words?
Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Love you all.
You didn't know that, did you?
I did not.
I'm actually saying it the right way, so shut up.
Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
You have a good one.
Thanks for having me.
We
Bye-bye.
are MythVision.
I'm not.